It's time for TWiT This Week in Tech. We've got a great roundtable of lots of people because this is our long-awaited, much-anticipated best of episodes. Some of the best moments from the year gone by, best conversations, best insights, best fun with many of our great panelists. You're going to enjoy this week in Tech next.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
This is TWiT This Week in Tech, episode 699 for Sunday, December 30th, 2018, our year's best. This Week in Tech is brought to you by Eero. Never think about Wi-Fi again when you can have brilliant, hyper-fast, super simple Wi-Fi with Eero. Now get total network protection with Eero Plus. Visit eero.com/twit and get $100 off the Eero base unit 2 beacons package plus 1 year of Eero Plus when you enter the code TWIT at checkout. And by LastPass. Make password management a priority in 2019. Secure every password-protected entry point to your business and reduce the threat of breach at lastpass.com/twit. And by Betterment, the investing tool for those who refuse to settle for average investing. Sign up today at betterment.com/twit and get up to 1 year managed free. Has another year gone by? I started the TWiT network. I say we because when we do TWiT, it's really a whole bunch of people involved. But in the earliest days, it was just me up in an attic somewhere with Kevin Rose and David Prager and Patrick Norton and, Robert recording shows and having a good time. Robert, what's his last name? Heron, thank you. Robert's going to think I forgot him. Recording shows, having a good time, talking about tech. Here we are. What is it now? 14 years in April later, still doing it with some of the most interesting people. I love getting all these journalists together each Sunday afternoon and talking about tech. TWiT is absolutely our flagship show, and we're really glad you watch it. We decided to take the week off because, the holidays are upon us. Christmas is coming, New Year's Eve is, Monday, tomorrow. So instead of, or a week from tomorrow, depending where you're listening to this, instead of doing all new shows, dragging people in on the holidays, we thought it'd be just fun to go back and look at some of the great moments on TWiT from 2018. Starting, of course, with perhaps the biggest security story of 2018, the meltdown in Spectre flaws. Although I think XKCD had a very nice take on it. Watch. Well, I guess we should talk about the big story, which is the worst security flaw in the history of all mankind. At least it would be if you watched mainstream media.
Yes. And, I've been trying to, and I've listened to Steve Gibson's explanation for this several times.
Over and over.
And I think I understand how well I don't understand this, but it's a very complicated thing. But the way that I would characterize this is that chips for the last...
Since 1995.
Yeah, 13 years now. They guess what is going to happen to speed things up, and we've now discovered that information that they're guessing can be peeked at.
Leaked,
harvested, whatever. Theoretically, it's all theoretical. So the good, we'll start with the good news or the sunny perspective. That's why I'm here, Leo, is to provide the sunny, happy perspective.
Mr. Optimist.
Yes. Which is that first of all, we don't know of any actual exploit that's taken place from this. And number two, it's going to be fixed and it's all going to be fine. That's the best possible scenario.
Yeah, it's the best possible scenario, but it may actually not be true. But we'll delve into that a little bit. These are the two flaws which were interestingly discovered simultaneously: Meltdown and Spectre. Spectre affects Intel chips. Meltdown affects not just Intel chips, but AMD chips and some ARM chips, including Qualcomm chips. And that's what is really the issue here, and one of the reasons I say it is probably the most serious security flaw we've seen, is because it pretty much affects any modern computer, including an iPhone, including an iPad. And so that means it's widespread. What it isn't is easy.
Right.
And Bruce Schneier talks a little bit about the synchronicity of two completely independent teams discovering this. And apparently this is not unusual. Bruce is very literate, so he compares Leibniz and Newton discovering calculus at the same time. I don't think it's like that. But I think what it is researchers tend to look in the same alleyways.
Yes.
And this is a category of flaws called timing flaws that have been lately very fruitful. Rowhammer is an example where people were able to kind of look into memory based on a kind of a weird race condition. So so in other words, it's interesting that these are discovered by independent teams. Schneier says that's one reason we should worry about this, because if these two teams discovered it at roughly the same time independently, who else discovered it? And who might have discovered it even a year ago or 2 years ago?
Or 10 years ago.
Or 10 years ago, including the NSA.
Yeah.
So this is, and I think, was it Micah suggested this XKCD comic strip? Randall is great at explaining this stuff. This is XKCD number 1938. The Meltdown Inspector exploits use speculative execution? What's that? Well, you know the trolley problem? Well, for a while now, and geeks know the trolley problem because it's talked about a lot in self-driving cars.
Yes.
Well, for a while now, CPUs have basically been sending trolleys down both paths, quantum style, while awaiting your choice. That's speculative execution. Intel started doing it in 1995 because it really did speed up processors. They would guess what you will do next, start that execution, and if they guess correctly, it would be massive improvements. If they guessed wrong, yeah, you'd have to back up a little bit. Yeah. But it turned out the massive improvement outweighed the slowdown. So every processor, modern processor, uses speculative execution, except for maybe some of the dumbest ARM processors. Raspberry Pi, for instance, says we don't do that, so we don't have to worry. So, you know the trolley problem? Well, for a while now, both CPUs have basically been sending trolleys down both paths, quantum style, while awaiting your choice. Then the unneeded phantom trolley disappears. They say, well, you didn't do that. But the phantom trolley isn't supposed to touch anyone, but it turns out you can still use it to do stuff, and it can drive through walls. What she's saying here, and what's happening with Meltdown Inspector, is because another technique used by processors to speed up execution, very fast level 1 cache right next to the processor. In the speculative branch, it will load that cache with data for the next process. And it turns out the current process can peek at that data. This is why it isn't the most useful flaw ever, because that data, you don't really get to choose what's in that cache, but it might contain passwords, logins, credit card numbers. If you could do it a lot, like for over a long period of time, it might be really valuable. That's where, by the way, the biggest risk is to people running on processors, shared processors, like in virtual machines or in servers. So often when you have a web server, you're running on the same machine as 100 other websites. If one of those websites were a bad actor, he could run software that would then peek into all the other websites' cache activities and perhaps over a period of time get stuff. So that's the biggest risk. And by the way, that's why Amazon Web Services, Google services, Microsoft Azure, they've all been down lately. Even Epic Gaming went down. In fact, they've said, if you're playing Fortnite on our servers, you may notice some slowness. We're trying to patch them as fast as we can. So this is a big problem on shared processors, because then you wouldn't have to ever have malware on your system. It could just be somebody else acting badly. But if you had malware, or even, and Apple discovered that, this is a scary one, I think it was Meltdown, can be achieved by a browser running a JavaScript program. So you could theoretically go to a bad website, and the JavaScript hidden on that website could actually try to read your memory contents. It would only get what was in the cache. It would be really hit or miss. It's a much better tool for targeted. That's why the NSA would love this, because if you know, if I'm going after Mike Elgin, pardon this long explanation, but
it's complicated.
I think it's important.
Even the cartoon has to be explained. So that sounds bad. Honestly, I've been assuming we were doomed ever since I learned about Rowhammer. That was the other timing flaw that did. What's Rowhammer? If you toggle a row of memory cells on and off really fast, you can use electrical interference to flip nearby bits. And do we just suck at computers? Yep, especially shared ones. So, you're saying the cloud is full of phantom trolleys armed with hammers? Yes, that's exactly right. Okay. I'll just install updates. Good idea. That's the bottom line.
Yes.
Update.
Right.
Because everybody, Microsoft, Apple, Qualcomm, even Intel and AMD say we're going to put out patches. Those would be the better patches, the patched at microcode level. But if you're running Windows, it's been patched. If you're running a recent version of Macintosh, it's been patched, and those patches will continue to come out. For instance, the Safari patch, I don't think is out yet, but will come in.
And there'll probably be future patches that will be more elegant. Right now, they're just
one hopes
putting Band-Aids on it and making sure that it doesn't, it can't be
That's
exploited.
one issue here, of course, and the Register, when it first reported this on Tuesday, set everybody's hair on fire because they said you're going to see 5 to 30% performance degradation because the at least initial patches turn off speculative execution.
You just turn that off. That's what you get. Speculative execution, by the way, is the official name of Saudi Arabia's death penalty laws. But that's it's an entirely different issue. But yeah, that's if you just turn that off. And what they're going to do is over time, and Steve Gibson explained this beautifully, but they're going to get it back to the performance where there's no difference in performance eventually. I don't know, 6 months, whatever it is.
Apple, for instance, in its benchmark said the patch on Safari is going to give you a 1 to 2% performance degradation. Yeah. That's not noticeable. Right. Anything below 5%, you wouldn't notice.
Nobody will notice it.
Yeah. So bottom line is you should patch as soon as a patch is available. There are some complications, however. For instance, this is very annoying. If you are running a third-party antivirus on Windows, it may be blocking the Microsoft patch because antivirus, and this is one of the reasons I tell people don't use third-party antiviruses. Antiviruses use unsupported calls to make kernel memory calls. This would be blocked by the patch. Insane. And it would result in a blue screen of death. So a lot of people, I've heard from a number of people who said, well, I installed Microsoft's out of bandwidth patch, it was late last week, and I got a blue screen of death immediately. That's because of your third-party antivirus. And there's a list of third-party antiviruses. This is from ZDNet. Although the list is being maintained by Kevin Beaumont, a security researcher. He's got a public spreadsheet. That would be more up to date. This goes back to January 5th. A lot of antiviruses are either have not been fixed or haven't done what Microsoft asked, which was to change a registry key to signal to Windows Update, okay, it's okay to install now. So you may still not be getting it. It's kind of a mess, but I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think it's anything anybody should freak out about. It's very hard to use this.
If you do want to freak out about it, here's one reason why you might want to do that. So up until this point, whether anybody has exploited it is anyone's guess. And like you've said, it could be a state actor or whatever. Who knows what's going on? Could be the NSA. But now that it's been announced, there's a scramble, no doubt, among hackers to figure out if and how and when they can exploit this. So it's a challenge. And so the industry is quickly patching it and trying to fix it and fix the leaks. But as you pointed out, some Windows users aren't getting it. There's going to be different rollouts. And so there's a new urgency in the hacker, malicious actor industrial complex to exploit this.
Right. They know now it's there.
Exactly.
Timing flaws are notoriously difficult. Amy?
Yeah. I would say to go ahead and freak out about it.
Thanks for calming everything down.
Here from the freak out faction.
But here's why. If it was the case that, and this is particularly complicated because it's a hardware issue, and on top of it, it's not a bug that appeared overnight because somebody was trying to sort of make an update, and in the process of making the update, they broke something. This was a hardware flaw that has been inherent in the system that people knew about. I could say the same of Sony, which is no stranger to problems with hackers, and has a very, very long history of ignoring all of the weak signals, right?
And Sony would,
alerting
in fact,
them something's wrong.
Their attack was a targeted attack that would be particularly vulnerable to this kind of vulnerability.
Well, the point that I'm making is the part that people should be freaking out about is that as technology becomes more complicated, it's going to start breaking in sort of strange ways, which means that companies need to be ever more vigilant about forecasting out in advance and pressure testing systems for things like timing flaws, which somebody somewhere in the organization, I have to have thought they had to have raised that issue at some point. It's not like this could not have come as a giant surprise. And I might even argue that it was intentional and the consequences wound up being worse than maybe the risk management people might have thought in advance. So the reason to sort of freak out is because we think that once we purchase technology, it's ours and we have agency and domain over it. This is yet another example that that's not the case. And I know that these glitches and these hacks are getting more and more complicated for the average person to understand. However, it's incumbent upon us to stay focused and to ask for some serious answers.
Well, Intel, there are several, of course, class action lawsuits. That's not really probative, but there is some speculation that maybe this is a janky way to do it, and Intel should be faulted for choosing this way to speed up their processors. This was right. I don't know. I'm not educated enough to say. And
I'm not a hardware person.
You'd have to be a chip designer to really understand if this is janky or not.
But it's not like this was a brand new design and they were trying to do something totally radically different, over the last design cycle. I mean, this is going back.
Actually, you're right. 95, this wasn't a problem. But remember, a little bit later, Intel's lunch was starting to get eaten by AMD.
Yep.
Intel went down a bad road with the Itanium. They suddenly realized you can't get faster than 4 gigahertz. It just becomes unreliable. They were up against, maybe not by 1995, but quickly thereafter, up against a wall of performance. And there was huge demand for more performance. And as I remember Intel happened to have this Skunkworks project in Israel that when Itanium failed, they went to, that were doing things like branch prediction and speculative execution to get more performance out of the x86 platform. They wanted to move away from it, and they chose to go with x86. You perhaps could fault them for making a poor design decision, but on the other hand, it's been 22 years before we found the problem.
Right. And so again, I come back to, I hear from a lot of people, this has been around for 22 years. It's impossible that it's just now somebody figured this out. I wouldn't worry about it, right? If something horrible hasn't happened yet, what's the probability? And again, to me, this is yet another example of organizations making sacrifices for whatever gain that put consumers in harm's way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but this is a really good example of something so technical that even we, as people who cover tech, have a hard time wrapping our head around it. Steve Gibson, we talked about this on Tuesday, and even on Tuesday, Steve Gibson was, and here's this other problem. Might cause a slowdown. Nobody really understood the impact of this for a while, and it took a lot of minds thinking about it. How do you then explain this to regular people and CEOs and other people? I mean, how do you? This is the world we're living in. In fact, I remember the late Jerry Pournelle writing, I think it was in Lucifer's Hammer, and this was many years ago. He said, we're already in a world where most of the technology people use, they don't understand. They don't know how it's made. You could know how an internal combustion engine worked. Good luck explaining how a computer works. And if a catastrophic event were to happen, like an asteroid hitting the Earth, as it does in the book, we wouldn't be able to recreate it. Nobody would know how it was made in the first place. We're using stuff that is effectively magical. And now we're asking the wizards who created the magic, hey, guys, don't screw up. But we have no way to test that. Right?
And just wait until the AI is creating the AI.
Well, that's just a matter of time.
How do we?
Then it's way out of our control.
But that's already But that's kind of my point, right? Because we're already. So I will preface this by saying there's a lot of misplaced optimism and fear when it comes to
You're writing the book.
AI.
You're writing the book.
I'm writing the book about that. Yes. So, but we can't submit ourselves every time we butt up against a rough problem, and sort of just say, well, this is like a black box. If I had a nickel for every time I've heard somebody describe a complicated technology as a black box that we just can't understand, we shouldn't be in a position where we're creating technology that we can't understand, let alone can't explain, right? You know, and there's a lot of, you know, there's a lot of that. So that either tells me that humans have just gotten lazy and we don't want to take the time to understand. I mean, obviously technology has gotten a lot more complicated, but you know, we should not be in a situation where we are entirely reliant on tools and services and code and devices that you know, we can't in any meaningful way understand how it works, right?
From a journalistic standpoint,
math is hard.
Yeah, exactly.
This
is all
it hurts
rocket
my
science.
brain.
From a journalistic standpoint, I think that this is another one of those challenges on multiple levels. One, because yes, you know, we're talking about trying to explain this to I go back to normal people who aren't steeped in technology like we are, and when we try to explain this, a lot of times it's like people maybe necessarily who aren't interested in hearing about it and are just like, you know, they'll figure it out. So it does sort of go back to that apathy, I think, about these magical boxes that we don't understand how they work, and so we're apathetic to the problems because maybe we've never experienced them before ourselves. And so there are two things that become an issue. One is just explaining it in general, but two is like keeping control of the message or making sure that the right message gets out there, because inevitably how these things play out is it gets to the people that know more about this stuff, and they write their articles, they write their explanations, they put up their blog posts, they make comics, what have you. And then it trickles down to more mainstream. It's like secondary, and then the mainstream. It gets on local news outlets and things like that. And by the time it gets there, it's been bastardized so much and sort of translated so much that oftentimes there's so much inaccuracy because of the vagueness of it. And so by the time it gets to, you know, a family member of mine who is not as steeped in technology as I am, they're hearing a whole different story, and it's the worst possible thing. Yes. Then you add on top of that the fact that all of these news outlets are scrambling for views, they're scrambling for clicks, they're scrambling for page views and things like that. And you have headlines that tell incorrect stories or don't tell the whole story. And a lot of times we know, like we can tell from all of these different things that track our usage and our activity on pages, that people oftentimes don't go through and read the article. They read headlines. They read, you know, Twitter-sized bits of information. And so what we're doing is spreading misinformation, and it's so hard to get caught up with that. And even if we do sort of come back and say, okay, you know, you've heard this, but it's not exactly this. You try to explain what it is. Those articles get far less views than any of the articles that originally went out there and said, this is the end of the world. Yeah. Everything's melting down. So it's problem. Like there's a problem.
Your computer's a time bomb. Film at 11. But it is the world we live in where you want to be first. We were talking about this before the show. You want to be first. The only way to get the links is to be sensational and fast. And that's the worst situation. But I think both Amy and Micah are saying what I would completely agree with, which is ultimately this is the job of journalism, is to do the work to understand the tough stuff, and whether it's tech or government or whatever, and explain it so that we can have an informed populace. Right? That's the job.
Right. Well, there are journalists, there are reporters, and then there are editorialists like myself. And so one of the things that I would say is it's probably less important. I mean, the public is never going to understand this stuff.
Right.
The public can't locate Australia on a map.
Yeah.
Right. So the public is never going to understand this kind of security. And it's far more important that they have a sort of a behavioral operating system for coping with this stuff. And here's why. Every time we learn about these things, it's already been out there forever. I mean, this one's been out there for 2 decades. So it's like, it doesn't matter what you know now. It matters what you've been doing for 2 decades. So we need to figure out how to instruct the public so that they can protect their data, because we're always shocked and surprised by all the different creative ways that our information can be stolen from us. Every year, there's 2 or 3 major stories that is like, oh, I never even thought that was a way that people could harvest all my passwords. Third-party cloud services are routinely hacked and all this stuff downloaded and so on. And so there needs to be a much greater emphasis on providing the public with an all-purpose set of behaviors and tools that will allow them to keep their data safe, no matter what.
Is that possible?
It's possible.
Okay,
it's possible
I like
to do. It's possible to do the best we can with that stuff.
Right.
So right now, there's
certainly update.
Yeah, update, back up in the cloud, password, all that stuff.
Amy doesn't seem convinced. Amy, you read the article in The Atlantic in September, The Coming Software Apocalypse.
Yeah. So
I feel like sometimes I feel like we're at the top of a house of cards and it's starting to teeter.
Yeah, so a couple of things. We already have the tools to protect ourselves in a reasonable way against threats and hacks. You know, I would walk out in the street right now and just ask random people when the last time was that they updated their, OS, right? Updated the router settings. I mean, like updated everything. People just don't do it for any number of different reasons. I don't know. And I would also it's plausible to give people the tool set, but it's improbable that the everyday person is going to see the urgency in keeping themselves constantly safe. I mean, and it's replicate. This is why a lot of companies don't participate in strategic foresight, and they don't do the work of a futurist, because until something happens, they don't see the value in it.
They want to be reactive like Sony.
Well, and that's right. So, for Sony to have completely changed what it was doing, the many times that it got hacked would have been an investment for everyday people, right, to do the type of safeguarding that we're talking about, which isn't just running patches and updates, but also paying attention to the news.
The Secret Service told me this years ago, banks would rather pay the losses than fix the system.
So we're talking about an investment in time and money that companies which have a financial stake in all of this aren't willing to make. I just don't see everyday people being willing to do that either. Now, I will say that this, I'm a quantitative futurist, and this has been my job for 15 years, but I had a first career. I was a journalist. I was a correspondent, and I worked at the Wall Street Journal and at Newsweek. That's why I lived in Japan and China. And I went to the Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism. So the comments about journalists exploiting tech news for traffic gain, I think is some of that may be true. And we certainly live in a digital economy where attention is currency, unfortunately. But just because you produce, just because, Randall Munroe creates a really great XKCD that explains this very complicated problem, doesn't mean that my dad, is reading it. And it doesn't mean that my dad will read it even if I send it to him, right? So part of the problem is, again, we're quick to blame institutions, and we're quick to blame journalists lately. We are reluctant to blame ourselves in being complicit in some of this. And
but I wouldn't expect your dad to learn what Meltdown and Spectre do. I would expect.
No, but I would absolutely expect him to run updates, and he doesn't.
Right.
I mean, and
yeah.
I have it scheduled. I don't run automatic updates because sometimes, the update isn't the right one to run at that time. But I have a very methodical way of constantly updating all my stuff, and I have secondary and tertiary checks running on different things. The average person's not going to do that, but my dad can't wait for me to come home to visit him.
It's your job.
And at that point do all the tech support. I mean, and.
Well, I spent 6 hours a week on the radio talking to normal people, trying to convince them to do this. But you're absolutely right.
But until something happens to them, they don't see they won't do it. That's the problem. So I love the idea of having some kind of digital.
We lost your audio. Is that us or is that Amy? We'll call you right back, Amy.
Oh wait.
Oh,
it's
you
that
sat
was
on
not
the mute.
Spectre, that was elbow, and
Elbow
I elbowed
and
my.
Happens all the time. Yep.
No, I was
You were saying about how we can't control our technology.
No, going forward. Well, yeah.
Her elbows can't.
Yeah, the irony is not lost, but I was fired up. Going forward, we all have to develop a different kind of digital street smarts that is unlike, I think, in the past, we're just surrounded by more and more complicated technologies, and so this is the kind of thing we're not going to pick up on our own.
So who do you say is responsible? I mean, is like the everyman? Is your dad? Is it up to him? Because I hate to do that. Well,
so I mean, yeah, I would say because we are now all connected, right? So this isn't an individual's problem.
It's not just him.
No, it's all of us, and to some extent, I love my father, but my dad, like jacking around and not updating his iPad for whatever reason, ultimately in some way impacts me, because when we have a network of devices that are vulnerable in some way, it makes it easier for people to find, the big payoffs, the big 0 days, right? Like the big 0 days that everybody's looking for,
Well,
anyhow, just makes it.
And what we're doing now, what last year's been about, and certainly this year will be about, and we'll find out about it at CES, is installing a bunch of internet-connected dumb devices in our houses that are, in many cases, not updatable and are not properly configured, and just trusting to luck that they don't. And again, you make the excellent point, Amy. It's not about protecting us as an individual; it's protecting the ecosystem.
Right. And we haven't even. We're talking about a chip, like a chipset. We haven't even, we have devices now that listen to us. So all of these digital assistants, I'm just waiting for the first exploit to come down the pipeline, because it is, right, at some point.
It's sort of herd immunity, and we're definitely failing at said herd immunity.
But I don't see an easy answer. I mean, again, I would go back to the job of journalism is so important these days. And it's a shame that it's being dragged through the mud. Yeah. But this is an example of, I would say, Amy, that if your dad doesn't need to understand it, but if your dad were writing for the Wall Street Journal, it would behoove him to talk to experts, find out as much as he can, and do the best job he can explaining it to people who need to know this information.
I mean, the easiest way to do, here's this. I think the four of us actually just came up with the solution, and the solution is we need some kind of. No. Here's the solution, because I think we need like a CDC for.
Oh, I love it.
The digital
there
environment.
We go.
You're right. Right. We need the Centers for Disease Control. If you stop and think about sort of their mandate and what they do and where they are and how they're funded, a lot of what they do is try to predict and manage epidemics, to manage the overall health of people living in our country. I think that we're probably due for some kind of CDC that does exactly what we were talking about moments ago, which is like
there kind
of herd immunity.
There kind of is. I'm not saying it does a good job. But there's the U.S. Computer Emergency Readiness Team, which is part of the Department of Homeland Security. That's kind of what it's supposed to be.
Yeah, but because I've looked at their work before, and it's not it's not the same. So Mike made a very, very good point, which was that we need to position ourselves so that everyday people have tools, and on that website, if you show it again, there you can follow it, and on the site they do every now and then list so the current activity, and they've got that alerts and tips.
Yeah.
They do have like PDFs and things that you can download, but it doesn't. We need a CDC level kind of sort of institution that has the press savvy, that can help educate the public.
That's such a good point. CDC has been a huge boon, I think, to public health.
Sure, that's right. And I would include our digital ecosystem and how we behave inside of it and how we are affected by it as part of our overall system of public health. right?
It is.
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking, this is a little off topic, but I was just thinking about this the other day. There's so many apps these days where one of the first things it asks you is, hey, if you want to get in touch with all of your friends, go ahead and click this button, and we'll make sure that if your friends are on this app, then you can use it too. And then you upload your entire database of contact information to their database, your entire library of contact information. And it's a small thing, but it's essentially sort of breaking the trust of everybody who trusted you with their information, who trusted you with their phone number, their email, their address, whatever ends up getting updated to those cloud servers. And we all,
it's like the opposite of an STD alert.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. I mean, and
to me, the most outrageous and underappreciated example of that is Google Photos, which I love, absolutely love Google Photos. But Google Photos, I can take pictures of all kinds of people, strangers, anybody, and it uploads to Google Photos.
Identifies them.
And then it asks me to say who they are.
Yeah.
So I'm basically saying, oh, that's Leo.
Database. Yeah.
I didn't ask your permission. They didn't ask your permission. But
Facebook's even worse that way.
Oh, yeah.
And part of the problem is Facebook, for example, leaks information in ways that the user doesn't know.
Yeah.
So there's a friend-of-friend problem on Facebook, which is if you take a Facebook quiz, which isn't really a quiz. I know you really want to know which Game of Thrones character you are, but really what's happening is you're giving a lot of information to a third party, like let's say Cambridge Analytica.
Yeah.
But worse than that, as soon as you agree to that, they get access not just to your information, but your friends' information. So you're leaking, and I don't think people know that, and you're leaking your friends' information. You probably, if you knew that, might not even do it. But nobody knows.
So again, so now let's just take that entire story, Leo, that you just told, and instead of photos or instead of Game of Thrones and a game, let's say that, because what you're describing a communicable disease.
Yes.
Right. So
everybody seems to want to get. It's worse.
Well,
it's like, give me smallpox.
If this was the CDC and if we use the same vocabulary, because part of the problem is currently, like, everyday people lack the analogies to understand the impact of these systems and tools. So you could describe exactly what you just said and replace Facebook with smallpox, and people would immediately understand that, this is something that they should be paying attention to. We don't have the shared vocabulary. And I'm not saying that Facebook is smallpox.
I am.
I'm not saying
I am.
There's the headline. Facebook is smallpox.
I am. Actually, if you look at what
That's
CERT
be the name
does.
for the show this week,
if
right?
you look at what CERT does, I'm looking at the CERT alert for Meltdown Inspector, and it's actually quite good, and they put it out on January 3rd. They updated it January 4th. They updated it again on Friday. Apparently, they went home for the weekend. That's too bad, but so they're underfunded, but it's pretty good with links to vendors and vendor mitigations, lots of additional information, including the original research. They refer to the United Kingdom, which has a nice national cybersecurity center. So they're working with other similar governmental agencies. This is right, but what they lack is the one thing I think you're right that they need to do, which is a better public-facing presence.
And yes, and it's not written. U.S. CERT is, if you have some of the language and you're a little bit more technically inclined, it's a great site to be on. But
it's for sysadmins and IT pros. Yeah,
that's right. That's right. And to be fair, the CDC has plenty of very top level public health and medical vocabulary and language and everything else. But the everyday person and journalists can also go onto that website and still make sense of what's there. So that's we need. And we have people from the CDC who go out and speak. We've had movies made about the CDC. CDC is part of NCIS.
Yeah, make it sexy. Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
I like that. So
I think we just solved the problem.
We have the backbone of it. We just need to really step it up. And thank goodness President Trump is right up on the cyber.
Yep.
And
cyber's going to be huge.
He's clearly going to get right to work on this. I know Donald watches.
We have the biggest cyber. So
maybe we can get Joe Scarborough to talk about it. Let's take a break. This is a great conversation, and we've just begun. I think we've done with Meltdown Inspector, but I do encourage everybody. I mean, the bottom line, you're watching this, you understand it. But tell your friends and family, make sure you update those systems, make sure you do those patches. It isn't, perhaps as easy as just doing the operating system patches. There will be microcode patches for the processors. And I have to say, I've read reports good reports from security experts who say in some cases, new hardware will be required. That's a big problem because I just bought an iMac Pro. Do I have to buy another one in a year?
Throw it away.
I'm going to throw it away. It's got the Meltdown Spectre. So it's got
the STG.
It's got the Meltdown. But good news, I'm Cersei Lannister. That's the good news. Amazon Go opens tomorrow. This is in the Amazon headquarters. It's the first. But the idea is there's no humans. You walk in, it recognizes you, I presume, from your phone.
Yeah.
You pick up what you want. You walk out. Cameras register what you bought on the shelves and other places and charge you for it on, I guess, Android Pay or what they call Google Pay now.
Yeah, this is... So
Or
wait,
Amazon
you have
Pay,
to
maybe.
you still have
I
to
don't know.
register your phone when you walk in.
Okay.
So you have to say, here's
scan
my
it?
phone, you scan it. It's now your phone is matched to you. And then presumably the system with all the cameras in the store are taking pictures of you, watching where you go. There are sensors on the products.
I mean,
And then
this is
it
like a
all checks you
Vegas
out on the
mini
map.
bar, right? If you take the wine off the shelf, you bought it?
Right. But what was interesting about it was that apparently in this demo store, there were still quite a few employees standing around to do things like ID checks on the alcohol section.
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah.
Interesting.
And, you know, if you have any experience, and this is really the basic version of this, it's not that crazy when you think about self-checkout at Safeway or what have you. But I don't know how often you've done that. I'm forced to do it all the time. It's a pain in the butt. There are always checkers having to come over and help people with their transactions for all kinds of reasons. And those already existing systems don't let you take alcohol through them usually. So I think it's a proof of concept. And maybe a little bit getting people used to the idea that you don't have to interact with a human, because kind of like the autonomous driving conversation, it's something that people will feel uncomfortable with for a long time until they do it and they see those charges pop up easily. And they'll just be like, wait, I can just come in and go, how are you going to know? And what's going to and why are you tracking me? And I think they're just getting people used to this idea.
That's really, you think people are going to have a hard time? Because I can't wait. I think that's
can't
exactly
either.
what I would love for a corner market. I just walk in, take what I want, and leave.
I think that people
I
are
would
not going
worry.
to like the tracking part of it.
Oh,
And
come
I think
on,
that they're
people,
going to,
get
for a
over
little
it.
while, feel like they're stealing things.
If you're carrying...
That would be it. That would be it, Lindsay, is that I would worry that it didn't actually check the sensor and I've now just stolen a whole bunch
That's
of stuff.
even
and I have to
better.
Check it.
What are you, crazy? That's
I feel
even
bad.
So
better.
sort of chasing you down the
I feel
block.
bad for the actual thieves that are like, I stole this. And they're like, no, actually, it's been charged to you anyway.
One of the New York Times reporter tried to shoplift, and he got charged for it anyway. So don't. But I think that's a bonus. I think maybe it's a guy thing. I don't know. I think I don't know. A lot of guys would say, "Hey, if they don't charge me, they don't charge me. I'm just going to take it." What? I can't believe you would feel guilty about that.
I think that people are just going to be, it's like like we were talking about earlier, people feel afraid of change. This is a big change. What if it doesn't work? It just takes time for people to get used to it. Although I will say that the idea of not having to show people what I'm buying is great, right?
But it's all tracked, right? So it's not really, they know what you're
but
you're
they
buying
look
something-
at
but
it.
no
You think
human
they
is
don't
gonna
know what
judge
you're
me
buying at
for-
Walmart?
Like,
I mean, come
buying
on.
Something really embarrassing. Someone can now
Okay,
find, like, you
I
can't
won't-
just say, hey, cash. It would be like, they now know that you bought whatever cream for whatever rash.
I think
They know that anyway.
embarrassment is
already
a
know
very
that.
20th century idea. It's
Yeah.
gone. There's no more embarrassment. It's over. Just everybody
Put it
knows
on Snapchat.
everything.
I'm mostly
Wherever you walk
embarrassed
out the
about the
store.
cheap rosé.
Actually,
I
you
don't-
should
I don't-
be.
yeah,
$2
that's
Chuck.
embarrassing.
Yeah, don't buy that there. So Nick Wingfield, who was writing the article, said he tried to trick the camera system by wrapping a shopping bag around a $4.35 four-pack of vanilla soda while it was still on the shelf, then tucked it under his arm and walked out of the store. He still got charged.
Ah,
Sorry, Nick.
nice try.
Thanks for shopping. You just bought $4.35 worth of dry soda that you didn't want.
Was there an RFID as part of this?
I don't know.
I didn't see that in this piece.
No, they
It seemed like
implied that it's all
mostly
from cameras.
just cameras,
Yeah.
your location in the store, and added to shots of you.
I feel bad about people who work at 7-Eleven stores, but because I mean, really,
Any stores.
or bodegas we are going to see fewer and fewer entry-level jobs in general, right? Drivers, Uber drivers, convenience stores. But what is more convenient than and you could put little ones of these everywhere. You don't have to put wine in them. You can just put little ones of them everywhere, and you just walk in, grab something, and go. I think that's the future. I'm going to predict this. Well, 5 years from now.
I still have to walk in though, Leo. Like that's the problem is that I don't want to have to walk in. Once I've walked in, I actually prefer to have a cashier than doing a self-checkout. I don't know. I like the process. I might be the only one.
I don't like the self-checkouts, but that's mostly because they don't work.
If I had a drone that
very well.
delivered me all the stuff, then I'm all in.
Well, we do that. I mean, I do that too. I literally have an Amazon delivery every single day, several usually.
I think it's going to be a hybrid. I think at some point it may turn out to be sort of a luxury experience to have a checkout, right?
Yeah.
So
it's like in Oregon and New Jersey where they pump your gas.
Right. And be like, well, not Oregon, not anymore.
Not anymore. What are those poor people in Oregon going to do? They have to figure out.
So confused.
It's flat out panic.
What do I? You mean? Wait a minute. I got to put a hose in my car? What are you talking about?
That's why they need electric vehicles.
They need electric vehicles in Oregon.
And autonomous ones too.
No, I'm very excited. I think this is a great idea. But again, I hate saying that because I feel bad about people who will be losing their jobs because maybe not.
I don't know. I'm trying to be optimistic about this because
Somebody's
I'm wondering
gonna
about the same thing. But somebody has to stock it. Somebody has to polish everything. There may be somebody who's there as sort of a concierge to talk to you.
Your job is a convenience store polisher?
Polisher. I don't know. But maybe this opens up more.
Wait a minute. Do they polish things at convenience stores?
They do.
I guess they'd have
Somebody's got to wipe those fingerprints off the door. Absolutely.
It's got to look shiny, modern.
And if you think about the number of people who actually work at a grocery store, department store, and who are actually, ringing up customers, it's not 100% by any means. So there certainly will be a lot of other things to do at these stores, I would think. But yeah, I'm super excited about the potential as well. There are definitely times where, just going to a gas station and needing a couple things, it would certainly be nice if I could just walk in, grab it, and walk out again, rather than standing in line waiting for everybody else to get their coffee order right. That kind of thing certainly would be very nice.
Should we be worried? You got young kids. I got young kids. Georgia has young kids. I don't know. Tim, do you have young kids? I don't want to leave you out.
Dogs.
You have dogs. Well, should we be worried about when they're entering the workforce in 7-10 years? Will there be jobs for these kids?
I think there will be. What I'm hoping is that they then use this moment to find their own jobs, right? And so that hopefully that my kids, once they're in college, they're looking at opportunities and they're saying, oh, I am going to be an autonomous vehicle cleaner. Right, like I'm going to work for the new zip car fleet.
Polisher.
And that's probably a really gross job. Don't do it. But that there may be some entrepreneurial moments for them. And there's still a lot to do. Like my yard is still not. There are no robots yet to trim my trees.
Oh, that's just a matter of time.
Well, sure. But
or
it's
self-trimming trees. I think CRISPR is going to self-trimming trees. I don't know. It's so funny because people who are in this field are kind of science fiction fans, many of us, and we on the one hand we want to live in the sci-fi future, but the reality of it may not be quite so wonderful. And I don't know. I mean, I just don't know. I think it's inexorable. I think it's kind of hard to say stop. We got to keep the entry-level jobs. That's not going to happen.
Well, I actually feel like I was thinking about this a lot the other day. At what point are we actually living in the sci-fi future? I mean, we live there now.
I think so.
And we feel like
I'm always talking to my
room.
I just, today I walk into my office, I say, Echo, turn on the lights.
Yeah. We live there now.
Yeah. We live, in some ways, we are living there now. We'll get back to our best of in just a second. I do want to thank our sponsors all year long, Eero in particular. Eero has been a sponsor for a couple of years. In fact, Eero joined us right at the very beginning when they first came out. That's when I started using Eero. They've moved on. Eero 2.0 is now out. And so I upgraded our home system to the new version of Eero, and I gave the old one to my mom, who loves it. We're all Eero'd up in the Laporte family. What is Eero? Well, it's the solution for bad Wi-Fi in a nutshell. The single router model these days, it doesn't work that well because we all have more devices on our Wi-Fi. We have neighbors with big I feel like sometimes the neighbors must have big antennas aimed at us because they interfere with our Wi-Fi. It's physics. Like light waves, Wi-Fi waves don't really travel very well around corners, through walls, upstairs and downstairs. It's like asking a light bulb in your living room to light the whole house. So you need something a little bit smarter. You need a distributed system. Now, in years gone by, we've had distributed systems, for instance, at TWiT for a decade. Most businesses have distributed systems. But that's been complicated, required an IT professional. It's not easy to do, and it is absolutely not expensive. Fast forward to the present times, we have a better choice. We have Eero, E-E-R-O, brings that distributed Wi-Fi model, the enterprise-grade Wi-Fi system to your home. Set it up in a few minutes. You don't need an IT professional. It is not expensive, and it really works. And I'm here to tell you, I use it, and I know. You put the Eero app on your iOS or Android device. It walks you through the setup. It's painless. You'll plug in the first unit, the base unit, and then you have a couple of beacons, depends on the size of your house. The typical kit has one base and 2 beacons. Those beacons, no wires, they just plug into the wall, but you're going to use the app to help place them. You place them at strategic points. I like to keep them in halls because not only, I feel like the bandwidth is, you know, it's like the highway for the bandwidth, but also the beacons are great because they have a little light on them. They make great night lights, so they light up our halls. You can turn those off if you don't want them to do that. And then you've got Wi-Fi throughout your house, and the Eero app lets you manage the network in the palm of your hand. You'll know how many devices are connected to any given access point. You'll know the internet speed you're getting. They test it nightly. You'll know, I mean, all sorts of stuff. Plus, they've got this new Eero Plus feature that I adore. Now, this is a subscription feature you don't have to get. You'll get all the benefits of Eero without it. But Eero Plus really is a nice add-on. It's simply designed reliable security that defends you against threats in the outside world. Blocks malware from the whole network. Blocks spyware from the whole network. Phishing attacks. Unsuitable content. If you have kids in the house, and we have a 16-year-old, I can just block the devices he uses from adult content, gambling, violence, that kind of thing on the internet. But we can all be blocked, all be prevented from getting malware. I really love that. You can also check the sites you visit. Well, actually, this is what it does automatically, against their database of known threats. So it keeps you from even going to malicious sites, but it doesn't slow you down, and that's the beauty part of it. It's actually a deal. Take a look. Eero Plus automatically tags sites that contain violent, illegal, or adult content, so you can choose what your kids can and cannot visit right in the Eero app. What else? Oh, you get a guest network that's completely separate from your network, state-of-the-art WPA2 encryption. I can't sell this enough. They don't mention it, but regular firmware updates. Very important nowadays. Don't buy a router that doesn't update automatically. The Eero does. They're constantly working to make sure it's the most secure, has the latest features and the latest security. And I have to admit, when I first got the Eero, I had some questions about how to set it up and stuff. I called support. They were so great. You'll get a Wi-Fi expert fast, within 30 seconds. And what was nice is they stayed on the phone with me till I said, yep, it's all lit up. Yeah, they really walked me through it. Great support. What else can I tell you about them? The guest network, WPA2 encryption, they've said already that they'll be able to upgrade to the new WPA3 in software as soon as that's ready, as soon as that standard is defined. You can look at the Eero app at any time and see everything that's going on. I just love this thing. Look, I know the worst thing any geek can hear. Honey, the Wi-Fi's down. I used to get that all the time until we got an Eero. Fast, reliable, enterprise-grade networking for your home. You want this. Go right now. We're going to have a great deal for you. The $100 off the Eero base unit plus 2 beacons and a year of Eero Plus. All you have to do is go to eero.com/twit and enter the code TWIT at checkout. They're giving us a very nice holiday gift. $100 off. You get the base unit, 2 beacons, and a year of Eero Plus. All in one package and $100 off. eero.com/twit. And at checkout, you can enter TWIT. It's great. It's great. eero.com/twit. Enter the code TWIT at checkout for $100 off. Now back to TWIT. What the hell is Elon Musk making a flamethrower for the Boring Company for?
Because you can.
What is that? I don't...
Oh, come on. It's brilliant marketing.
They're
useless in a zombie apocalypse. Everyone's saying, well, maybe the Boring Company's gone down and opened that latter gate to hell. Flamethrowers are useless against zombies, particularly fast ones. You need a good axe. Or a cricket bat.
Should I pre-order it? It's got to be illegal, right?
No, perfectly legal.
legal in most states. Not
It's not legal here.
There's a guy in Minnesota who was...
My producer's making up laws quickly. No, not legal here. Not.
Well, no, there was a guy in Minnesota who broadcast himself on social media using one of these things to clear the snow off his front drive. Oh, I don't know.
Now, why is Elon saying, obviously, a flamethrower is a super terrible idea, definitely don't buy one, and yet they are apparently offering pre-orders?
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Oh, unless you like fun, is his subsequent tweet. He says, these should be legal. The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms allows throwers with flames shorter than 10 feet. So...
Not really a thrower.
To me,
more of an advanced cigarette lighter. Than
to me, it's like
you got a light,
putting a lightsaber with two sabers on either side. It's just asking for trouble.
I mean, you've got to promote your company one way or the other, and
it worked.
I mean, did you see that there was some corresponding articles this week about the pointlessness of the Boring Company? This idea of running a tunnel from one side to the other, just big enough so that you can put a car in it. And fundamentally, it restricts the use of it for the elite.
Oh, yeah.
You can't move.
Again, what's wrong with that? No, that's what Elon says. He says, I don't like public transit. Why would you want to be in a train with a lot of other people?
Yes. Because it's really efficient at moving large numbers of people from point A to point B.
Which the Boring Company is not, because it's...
Well, if you can only...
You can have a boring bus.
You're going to have to charge for one car.
Yeah, because you dug a hole in LA.
Because you dug a hole for that distance. And at the end of the day, it's actually not going to solve the transport problem for the society as a whole, because it's only going to move a few hundred people at a time at most. Like at any given interval, you're only going to have a few hundred cars inside the tunnel.
Devendra, you said something I thought fairly controversial.
Oh, no.
Which was that the iPhone 10 was Apple's last great product. Does that...
Yeah.
Since the only other product since then...
It wasn't that long ago. It was
is the HomePod. I'm thinking, is that a backdoor diss for the HomePod?
I mean, the HomePod was delayed, and even now it's like not fully ready. Brian's review is really good.
Don't rush to buy it, says Brian.
Yeah.
Well,
it's a half-baked product right now.
I don't know. I kind of feel like I was a little bit harder on it than other people. Do you guys feel that way?
You weren't as hard on it as I was.
Really? Okay, because like. I felt like it just feels like it's unfinished, right? Because Siri does a lot more on the iPhone than it does on the HomePod, and so it's been training us to use Siri in a certain way, and yet things like the calendar, which I use a lot with Siri, doesn't work on the HomePod. Things like hailing a car doesn't work on Siri. On the HomePod, but it works on the iPhone and other things like that, So it just feels like, I don't know why they released it when it's not really done. I mean, indisputably it's not done because that multi-room speaker feature is not out yet. So what I don't really get is if they're already late, why even come out when it's unfinished? It kind of makes it hard for me to write about, because I'm like, well, the music part sounds great, but all this other stuff doesn't work, and that's awkward.
Devendra, you agree?
I mean, I've only listened to it a bit. Chris Velasco at Engadget is going to be reviewing that for us. It sounds really good because it's a $350 super high-tech speaker. But yeah, I agree. The Siri stuff it feels really unfinished, really weak in comparison to what we're getting from Alexa speakers. I also tested out the Harman Kardon Invoke, which is the Cortana speaker, and even that felt more fully featured than the HomePod. And that thing's just $200.
So. Did either of you get invited to the briefings that Apple had in Cupertino?
Yeah. I went to the HomePod briefing about 2 weeks ago. We went to the Audio Lab tour where they showed us how they tested.
This was supposed to, you're not getting the Kool-Aid soaked in. So let me channel Tim Cook here and say, but what you guys don't understand, it's not a Siri device. It's a speaker. It's all about the sound. We're reinventing how speakers work. The Siri capability is merely to play music. You're thinking it's an echo. It's not an echo. It's a new kind of music listening device.
But yeah, so it was Phil Schiller who said that, and
sorry,
no worries.
Channeled the wrong guy.
Basically, he was saying so he was giving us the history of how the HomePod was made, right? So it's been in development for 6 years, on and off. Like they tabled it for a little bit in between, and so they started it before Apple Music even launched, before they even bought Beats even, and before HomeKit came out, right? So. The HomePod comes out after this. I mean, it's in development before that, but all this stuff comes out in the middle. And then suddenly they had to get this HomePod to work with these new services that Apple has, you know. So that's you can kind of get the sense of why it was so chaotic to develop this thing. But then when you try it, you're going to realize like, this thing doesn't really seem like it's that polished yet. It doesn't really seem like it's done. So, I mean, how much can you justify it being that dumb? You know, it sounds amazing. It sounds great. But if you're competing...
This is where I would disagree.
Okay.
I don't think it sounds that amazing.
Okay.
I think Apple fails on all fronts. Now, it sounds good. It sounds fine.
It's good.
That's the first I've heard.
Very good.
Okay.
Yeah, because look I'll read some of the headlines. Apple HomePod review. This is Joanna Stern. Super sound, but not super smart. They agreed with you. The iMore folks. Retina for your ears.
Yeah, I don't know about that.
Nilay Patel in The Verge said, I am a speaker fanatic, and he showed off his analog stereo, and I think this sounds amazing. But there's a problem. There's something called physics, and I know that the Australian Prime Minister thinks that physics is not an immutable law, but I think physics is an immutable law, and this, which is not a HomePod, it's just an amazing simulation. This is too small to really be a great speaker. So I think if you're going to say it sounds good, you really should add the clause, it sounds good for its size.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good point. And it definitely does fill up the whole room like a
that's
small
one thing that's
size
interesting
apartment.
because it has
really
tweeters
loud.
all around it, so it doesn't need... You don't need to sit in front of it. Everywhere is equal.
Yeah, and that's it. I'm not an audiophile, so I'm not going to pretend that I know great details about like these 7 tweeters and all that stuff and have like a great attention to detail when it comes to sound. But, you know, it sounds really good to me compared to a lot of speakers I've tried. But I don't think that really justifies the fact that Siri is quite inadequate compared to how it even is on the iPhone or how it's compared to Alexa even. Like, here's a thought experiment, guys. So imagine if Apple had waited another year and made all those features work that are missing on Siri and released it as it is with nice music, nice sound, and all those nice features working as a virtual assistant.
Well, there's another problem. It only works with Apple Music. Here's my opinion. This is designed for somebody who is bathing in the warm glow of the Apple bath. Right. This is for somebody, because you can't even set it up if you don't have an iPhone or an iPad. You
right.
can't,
Not even a Mac. You can't use a Mac, yeah.
You cannot use it without an iPhone or an iPad.
Wow.
So
okay.
That's insane. So this is a product designed for somebody who's absolutely in the, I mean, I'm not going to say Apple sheep, but somebody who's really in the Apple ecosystem and wants something that is already a subscriber to Apple Music, wants something that works with Apple Music. It sounds fine for its size. My issue is, you know, we did a comparison yesterday on the new screensavers. We compared the Invoke, the Harman Kardon, which did not sound as good. The Sonos One, which is Sonos's small Play One speaker with Amazon Echo built in, which actually wasn't as good, but was close, and it's half the price. You could buy 2 and get a stereo pair. That might be fairly competitive. We compared it,
or get a Play 3 and an Echo Dot, right? Like there are other ways to do that.
Compared to a Play 3 or a Play 5. I don't think the Apple's HomePod is as good. And I guess the point I would really make is if you want a good speaker, if you want good sound, this is how I think of it. You know, I brought this up. Keith Richards, the guitarist for the Rolling Stone, wrote most of their songs with Mick Jagger. He got his musical education listening to a tinny transistor radio in bed, listening to a pirate radio station out in the ocean. It sounded crappy, but that's how he heard Howlin' Wolf and Muddy Waters and became, you know, a music fanatic. Paul McCartney, same thing. I mean, you're still getting some music, but there's all the music that you would hear in a live performance. And then with each smaller device, each less capable device, you get less and less of the music. If you're really into music, you should freaking get a stereo. Spend a little bit more money and get a stereo. Get 2 speakers and sit at the apex of the triangle and listen. And if I put the HomePod in the middle and listen to my stereo, it's not, it's like a different song. It's like different music. It's completely a different experience. You're getting a quarter of the full experience when you listen to the HomePod. So for Apple to say, well, no, it's not a Siri device, it's a new way of thinking about music, is wrong.
And you know, the deal breaker for me, too, that I wrote about in the review is it was picking the wrong music for me. You know, despite all the shortcomings of Siri, or in addition to all the shortcomings, I was trying to go along with like, oh, this should be primarily about music. This should be great at playing music. And, you know, in the Apple Music app, app, I selected all my favorite artists. They were like, you know, Smiths, Radiohead, Talking Heads, blah, blah, blah. And instead of picking artists similar to mine, I would ask Siri, play some music, and it would play Dashboard Confessional, which, I'm sorry, I hate that band so much.
I can beat that.
I hate it so much.
I said, listen to classical music.
Right.
It played old school hip hop.
Okay.
Classical for some, but not what I was going for.
Sure.
I mean, you know, I like NWA as much as the next guy, but I was thinking something a little bit more mellow. I don't know. Baroque or something. And I finally, part of that is because Apple Music's problem, not the HomePod's problem, right?
I thought Apple Music was supposed to be better. So I'm not personally an Apple Music user. I use Spotify, but you know, I had tested it before, and these For You playlists more or less had some pretty spot on playlists generated for me back in the day when I was testing
good,
this.
I think.
Spotify's really good too. So when I first turned on the HomePod, I said play some music. I expected it to look at my history of what I listened to on Apple Music and also the artists that I picked, which is pretty obvious. And it was playing all this random stuff. Yeah. Dashboard Confessional being one. Leroy Francis, I've never listened to. Selena Gomez, I don't even know who these people are, really.
Selena Gomez.
Yeah, you know, like somehow it thinks I'm a 17-year-old or something.
I think in general that is Apple Music. It's aimed at a generation, you know, that is a little, even you who are a lot younger than me.
But it's supposed to be listening to what I like. That's the whole point of it. So that was really the deal breaker.
Well, and by the way, go look in Apple Music for classical music. Good luck finding it. Seriously, it's not.
Yeah, here's the thing. Yeah, here's the thing though. You make a good point about, is this if you really want the audio experience, then get a stereo. But the point of all these devices, the Sonos, the Echo, the Invoke, which I have one of here, and this HomePod, the whole point of it is that you shouldn't have to whip out a phone or an iPad. You should be able to just drive the thing by talking.
Right.
And so even if it isn't as intelligent as the others, even if it doesn't have the full Siri experience, you should at least be able to go through the basics and say, play this, play that, play the other thing, get my entire music collection from the cloud, play this album or that album. And from what I understand, it doesn't do that. And if it doesn't do that, I think Brian's absolutely right. Why did they ship this thing? There's a case to be made sometimes for shipping things early when they have to be out in the world and people have to be interacting with them so that the engineers can get feedback and they can fine-tune the thing quickly. But that's not the case here. They just shipped this thing before it was ready. And given the amount of money that Apple has in the bank, I just don't understand why.
Yeah, it almost feels like they have competitive pressure because Amazon made a killing during the holidays. They slashed the price of the Echo to $85 from $99. I think those are the numbers. And so, you know, they have more pressure than ever to put this thing out. But at the same time, Apple's been saying for years, like, we don't rush to be first, right? We're fine with being later and doing a better job than everybody else. And in this case, I mean, I think they could only say that, you know, maybe Leo disagrees, but they did better with audio quality, but they really just dropped the ball on everything else.
It's decent for what it is. You know, there are times when you would want a HomePod. For instance, in the kitchen, it's great because you don't stand. I mean, if you're listening to music, you don't always get to sit in the, you know, sweet spot with two speakers left and right.
Yeah.
You're in the kitchen, you're cooking, you're moving around, and it's great for that because of the tweeters all the way around, and it sounds good no matter where you are. So I think it's a mono speaker. They don't have any stereo option.
Well, you can add a second speaker that plays at the same time, like next to it. You can in a future software update.
In a future update.
And that's my point, right? It's not done. Yeah. So why didn't they wait like 6 months or something to ship a perfectly polished product that would have been really nice?
I think I blame Apple a little bit because I think the white earbuds that they shipped with the iPhone and the iPod before it degraded the musical tastes of a whole generation. That people who grew up with crappily compressed music on crappy earbuds.
You mean the AirPods or the
No, just for years.
The original
music
classic.
For a whole generation meant an iPod with white earbuds in, and that is not, frankly, very good quality.
Right.
And I don't want Apple to start saying how great this sounds because I think it's doing a disservice to people who could hear a lot more of the music. You can't get a speaker that size for $350 that's going to be a great speaker. You can't. It's great for its size. And I think there are even better speakers for that price, frankly.
Yeah. So the Sonos Play 3 is what, $300? I think, and that thing sounds a lot better.
I think so. Just as it has more bass, for one thing.
It has more bass. But, to Apple's credit, I think what they did really well with the HomePod is that you can push that thing to max volume, and it won't distort.
It does handle high
nothing
volume.
Distorts. I think partially because it doesn't really go as max as some other things, right? We were comparing it to the Google Max. And that thing goes much louder, and then you start to hear like the bass starts to distort, and some of the high notes. So you could see that Apple's trying to balance something here, but I think you're onto something, Leo. Like everybody who grew up with iPods, or just in general, we got used to okay sounding music, and most people just don't have speakers in their homes. I think that's a
even
bigger
with
thing too.
Even like with surround, maybe because people my age
That's
might
a cinephile
surround. Yeah, because you're watching movies on your big screen.
Like
TV.
I have all that stuff, but I know I'm way in like the minority here. But
I think
in
more
general,
people than you think have home theater systems. Right? Maybe not. I don't know.
It's a good portion of people, but it's not. I'm talking like mainstream consumers. So like just listening to music, in your home with speakers,
and this
is something that kind of died off.
I
and
know.
this
People
is good
bought,
for that.
People in my generation bought the stupid Bose sound acoustic wave.
Oh God,
radio,
and those were
right?
terrible.
The Paul
those
Harvey
never sounded good.
Yeah, I mean, there's so I don't know. And by the way, my ears are shot from years of wearing headphones and listening to rock and roll way too loud. But I can tell the difference. Yeah. And so I figured that somebody younger with better ears owes themselves something a little bit better. The Sonos Play 3 is $250. It's $100 less.
Oh, wow.
So for $50 more, you can get a Play 5, which really sounds good. And even then, though, I wish you would spend a little more and get a stereo.
Well, that's like the ultimate dream. I would wish more consumers would do that. But what I love about these devices is that Sonos and everything, like it made it easy for everybody to bring music out loud back into their homes. The big downside with HomePod for me is that it's so limited, right? It's limited to Apple Music, but so many people are using Spotify now, or you have your library of music on other devices. There's no aux jack, of course. There's none of the things you see even in simple Bluetooth speakers these days. I really like what Logitech's been doing, honestly. Like they just released their new lineup, which has Alexa built in, and they're also like Bluetooth portable speakers that you can take around everywhere. You could put them in the shower, you could take them to the beach. Like there's so much innovation happening here. Like what HomePod offers just doesn't feel like it's enough today.
Well, okay. I mean, I think we're beating a dead horse, but it makes me feel bad. I think, Ed, you're right. I mean, I think the future, and by the way, this device, the HomePod, is great for podcasting, as is the Amazon Echo and even the Invoke, and because you can, by voice in your house, say, let me listen to TWiT, or let me listen to your podcast, and /film, and that's great for podcasting. It puts podcasting in a way ahead of radio, in a way that I think is going to be very good for us. So I'm not knocking these devices, and I agree with you, Ed, that that's but Apple's not selling that. Apple's selling it as a great speaker, and I think that's doing us a disservice. If you just said, here's a pretty good speaker that you can listen to music on in your kitchen, that's what it is. Sure, I'll give you that. And Ed, you're right. I mean, the Siri at least does that much. It plays music, Apple Music. The fact it doesn't do Spotify that's going to come too, right?
I feel like the HomePod is going to be one of those products I might review again a year later.
Yeah.
Because it feels like, by then they'll probably open it to Spotify, yada, yada, and all those features that I mentioned are probably going to work by then. And it'll probably be a great product by then.
It reminds me of the Apple Watch, which in the first couple of generations was not compelling.
Yeah, they really nailed it on version 3.
Yeah. I think I'm actually wearing this now every day.
Well, this was actually the original problem with the original iPhone as well. Most people forget that the original iPhone, it didn't support apps. It didn't have an app store. It didn't support exchange mail. It had a whole bunch of things that were wrong with it, and they fixed that over the first year. But that was also one of the things that had to go out into the world and be used by people to improve in that fashion. And it isn't necessary with.
It still blew other smartphones away at the time, didn't it? Like the keyboard is awesome, and Safari browser was amazing compared to the really pared down browsers on old cell phones. So even though there were all these things missing, it's hard to compare with the HomePod, I think, where like the iPhone at least was a working, functional product.
It's a good point. The HomePod's late to a market with a lot of competition.
I mean, the iPhone was late to the smartphone market as well, but it just did a better job at a lot of things.
Yeah.
And you look back at the iPod, like that was super limited too, right? Didn't that only work with Macs for a long time, like ignoring the biggest PC market?
Maybe a year or two, I don't remember. But they put it out on Windows, and that's when it became really big, the iPod. So.
For sure.
You know what's funny is we come almost full circle now because, and Microsoft's been pushing this. They're probably at the Build conference. They're going to talk a lot about progressive web apps, which are different. They're different, but in a way they're the same as the web apps for the original iPhone. The idea that you would go to a website and you'd save it on your home screen, and now that's an app on your iPhone. That's what I'm excited about. Progressive web apps, though, Ed. I feel like I wish Apple would get behind that. They're being a little slow to the party.
I think so too. But in both of these cases, in the case of progressive web apps and in the whole competition with Spotify thing, what you're really seeing here is Apple protecting its sort of core services, and in a way that's very, very Microsoft-like. They're refusing to disrupt themselves. And in fact, there was some, forget who wrote this last week, but somebody did a study showing that Apple Music subscriptions are rising faster than Spotify subscriptions, and Apple Music will probably catch up with Spotify by the end of this year in terms of the install base. And so, a cynic could look at this and say, well, one reason that Apple's not putting Spotify on this, and they're making it difficult for Spotify to succeed in the Apple hardware ecosystem, is specifically so that Apple Music can surpass Spotify in terms of market share. A lot of money there.
The proof of that is there's no Bluetooth in the HomePod.
Yeah.
Something that would allow you to open it up to an Android device, for instance.
You could still AirPlay, right? So you can still AirPlay from your iPhone or iPad with Spotify or
Apple
whatever.
Technology.
Yeah. It's proprietary, but you could still use that for Spotify. So something.
Well, I mean, let's look at the Apple Watch for comparison, right? So the Apple Watch, you have to have an iPhone to set it up, right? And it's still that way, even though it's more independent than it was before. But the Apple Watch so far seems pretty successful. So, and this is some inside information, but I've heard that they have considered sharing the Apple Watch with Android phones. But what's stopping them is that so many Android people are switching to the iPhone. So why would they give people incentive to, stay with Android if so many people are switching to the iPhone? So that's how these decisions are made. But my point being that, counter argument, the Apple Watch only works with the iPhone, and yet people seem to love it, and it's still pretty successful.
If you're in the, I bet Ed would agree with this. The advantage of an ecosystem play like that and siloing it like that is you can make it a seamless, great experience. And Apple has done that. So if you live in the Apple world, you've got continuity, you've got handoff, you've got all this great stuff. Then your life is easy and smooth, and it's better not to have to think about these other guys and what speaker's better. You just buy the Apple speaker because it's an Apple speaker. That's the advantage.
That sounds like laziness, right? Like what Ed was saying, that is totally a Microsoft move. People are happy. Like, yeah, they'll drink whatever you give them, but this doesn't feel like the same Apple that killed.
You can't deny it's profitable.
Yeah, it certainly is. But right, Apple killed the iPod market with the iPhone. Right, the iPhone had to kill the iPod.
Right.
Like think of like how
and Apple's willing to do that. Apple's always been willing to do that, which is
are they anymore?
Oh, you think they're not anymore?
We're talking about how safe the HomePod is, and I think that's exactly it.
Point.
Yeah.
Well, when 70% of your revenue as it comes from the iPhone, as does Apple's,
right,
it's pretty hard to imagine killing the iPhone.
Well, not the iPhone, but something like killing its own services, right? Like Apple Music, okay, it hasn't been super successful initially, but as I was pointing out, it's growing.
Are bigger for Apple, a bigger portion of their revenue than either the Mac or the iPad.
Yep.
Services are $10 billion a quarter for Apple. So you don't want to kill those either. In fact, you saw the Wall Street Journal said at the growth rate Apple Music's going through, 5% a month, it's going to eclipse Spotify soon.
I wonder who leaked that statistic.
Yeah, the Journal's really good at repeating those.
Convenient timing.
With Spotify's about 2%. They don't include, of course, the free tier, which Apple doesn't have, and Spotify has hundreds of 140.
They have a 3-month trial or something, or is it 1 month? I forgot.
3 months, yeah. No, so
yeah, and they also don't count. They don't count the family subscriptions either. But
right. So, Ed, do you think it's? I mean, admitting that an ecosystem play is strong for Apple, you think in the long run though it's going to hurt them as it did Microsoft?
Well, it has to because look, I think it's a justification to say, you know, the seamless experience is the goal here. That's a great rationalization, but the reality is there's just so much money coming into Apple's coffers, and when you sit down in a product meeting and somebody says, okay, I've got this great idea, and but it's going to hurt this business that's bringing us $10 billion a quarter, there's somebody there who's going to say, nope, we don't do that. We're not going to do that. And that ultimately, once the numbers get that big, once the fiefdoms, the individual fiefdoms within, you know, the giant spaceship there become powerful enough, then they start to they start to block innovation, and they start to build moats around each of their businesses. And I've seen that play happen before. It's what happened to Microsoft in it led to Windows Vista.
And I have on my wall, and I'm very happy to have it, a signed copy of this fabulous cartoon from Bonkers World of the various org charts. And of course, Microsoft's was all the fiefdoms shooting at all the other fiefdoms. And it hurt Microsoft badly. And actually, to Satya Nadella's credit, I think he's changed Microsoft, and the attitude is very different now. It's
dramatically,
and it's made a difference in their operations significantly.
For sure.
Yeah.
I feel like I bring this up every time I come on, but it does feel like Microsoft is doing a lot of the Apple-y stuff, right? Like the Surface, the innovation behind the Surface laptops, the Surface Book, the Surface Studio that you're using right now, Leo, like these cool new devices that we're sitting here and watching Apple take away the ports people actually use on their MacBook Pros and give us keyboards that everybody hates. Everybody hates that keyboard. And like, I don't see we're seeing any indication that that's going to be fixed eventually. Like Apple's just going with this super flat design. A lot of things that we expect Apple to fix, we're just not seeing anymore. And that's worrying me, honestly. Like, I think to me, like Tim Cook is feeling more and more like Steve Ballmer. Like he's doing a good job of really, you know, pushing every product line and ramping everything up. But I don't know if we're going to see the innovation that we're kind of used to expecting from Apple.
Amazon made some acquisitions this year, some big ones. In fact, they kept buying our sponsors, which is fine. I mean, I'm glad they're doing well, including Jamie's Ring. But why? We don't know exactly how much. Initially, we thought it was $1 billion. Now I'm seeing from Recode numbers closer to 1.2 to 1.4 $1 billion. Now, Ring is a sponsor. We should mention we do Ring ads all the time. I take some responsibility for Ring's success. I will get zero of this money, but I'm happy for Jamie and his team because that's really nice. Here's the question: why?
Amazon Key.
Well, but they already have Key, right? They tried. Remember, they tried to buy August.
Yeah.
That fell through. In fact, August was pretty pissed off. They feel like that Amazon found out how everything worked and then said, okay, well, never mind. And they built shortly thereafter, they built the Key system, which allows an Amazon delivery person.
This expands on that.
Into your house. There's a camera. There's a lock. They can open the lock. The camera watches them while they put the package in the door and they leave. Is that available in Houston? Have you tried it?
Yes, it is available. I have not tried it. I know somebody who has it, and they love it. We have a real problem in Houston, as in a lot of other places, with people stealing packages. I believe Houston is the place, I think it is, where the guy invented the box where you pick it up and a shotgun shell goes off in the box and scares the scares the person. Yes,
only in Texas, my friend, and Florida and some states.
But that is but it's such an issue here that the guy loves it. You know, he doesn't mind at all. And I just could not do that. There's just no way I would allow that.
And
I couldn't do it. My dog would bite the guy, so that would be a problem.
Well, then my other problem is that it's the Amazon Logistics, which I don't know what it's like in Houston, but in Amazon Logistics in Petaluma is some person that not in a uniform in a normal car, because they kind of do it like Uber, where they list deliveries that they have, and somebody says, okay, I'll do those. And so to me, that's like somebody off the street coming in my house.
Yeah.
Now, I don't have the problem with packages getting stolen because I have a Ring video doorbell. And so, so maybe that's the, I don't know. So is that why they bought it? They want to replace Key with Ring?
Or expand those services.
Or have more.
I think it ties in. I think it ties in with the whole ecosystem for both. You know, I mean, when you look at Amazon, Google, and Apple are all competing to own your home and have as many devices in your home as possible. And I think it ties in with the Echo. And I'm sure that they will continue to find ways to integrate it. I suspect they're already integrated to some extent. But it's Amazon really having a really robust offering of home devices. And I think they're going to have more of them.
Does Ring do anything other than a doorbell?
They have basically it's a doorbell for the front door, and then they attach the doorbell to lights. So it has
security lights,
kind of the same thing. But they did, remember this, they were going to launch last Christmas a home security system, and ADT sued them. And I think that lawsuit's over. In fact, my understanding is shortly before Amazon bought them, Ring settled for a larger amount than they were agreed. You know, they suddenly said, okay, here's $25 million. And the ADT suit went away. So they have now on their page, they are selling their home security system.
Are they currently integrated to Alexa in any way?
Yes, totally.
Yeah, that's what I figured they would be.
Yeah. So, but everything, that actually...
Everything is. Correct,
everything is. That doesn't give them an exclusive by any means.
No, but it means that they can add value.
Theory. Yeah. So Amazon is famous for a number of things, and one of them is having a kind of quasi-Orwellian employee situation where they watch their employees in a microcosmic way. Everyone's clocked in, they monitor their location, and they're about to launch inevitably into this world where Amazon employees will be doing the lion's share of deliveries to the front door.
Yes.
And this is a way for them to monitor their own employees and their performance and their behavior.
Interesting.
Wow.
But you have to have so many of those Rings installed. Not everybody's going to put those in there. And what about that sense?
The privacy? So if I have a Ring in my house, does Amazon have the right to look at the video?
Okay.
That my Ring is recording?
This is something that I've been kind of pursuing recently. I've asked Amazon several times pointed questions about exactly what they do in terms of, do they listen when they're not listening to the keywords, and are they doing experiments where they have Alexa doing things that people don't necessarily expect? And whenever I ask those questions, they just stop interacting with me. They don't answer them. And that doesn't mean that they're doing those things. It doesn't mean anything nefarious, but it does mean that they have not answered those questions yet.
That's odd.
I've read their terms of service. There's nothing in the terms of service that I can find that prohibits them from monitoring video feeds, listening in through Amazon, doing any of these things. And I think it's an underexplored area. We have this black box that we're putting in every house. And I'm not a conspiracy theory minded person or suspicious of tech companies as a rule, but in this case, I'm a little concerned about Amazon because they hold it so close to the vest. They don't tell us exactly what they're doing. They have a history of, for example, with the Fire Phone, of when you take a picture of something, they're also transmitting the audio back to Amazon and doing God knows what with it. So there's a I don't think they've earned our trust yet. They're not transparent enough yet, and I think that it behooves those of us in the media to keep pushing them to find out exactly what their intentions are, what they do, what they don't do, and it's especially urgent now that they have all these Ring video doorbells.
Mm-hmm. You know, it's funny because my Echo will sometimes talk to me even though I don't say the word.
Oh, that happens all the time. It's because you're watching TV, right? Or
or hear something else and it thinks you're saying the word.
So does my Google Home, though. All of these.
I apologize for saying that word on your show because I'm sure that millions of Echoes just got activated when I said it. So
you know what? You know, it's only a problem if you're listening to the show on your Echo, because then it stops the show and says, "What do you want?" And so that's a little annoying. But other than that, these things happen. We actually bloop it out of the downloaded version. So it's only people watching live that get bit by that. But isn't that's something we've decided to start doing, bloop it out.
And here's a weird thing that may surprise some of your listeners. Yeah. But I actually travel with both my
Echo, and also my Ring video doorbell. I travel with both of these.
What?
They're two of the most important things that I travel with. Yeah, everywhere we go, we plug in the Echo. We have music, we have information, weather reports.
So you're
all the
not
normal.
so worried about the privacy implications that you don't use it.
No.
I'm not, and how do you hook up the doorbell? Are you renting a place, or are you in a hotel? Where are you that you can hook up a doorbell?
I use mounting putty, and I put it outside the door. I connect it to the Wi-Fi, and everywhere I go.
It's got a 1-year battery in it. Some of them. And so you don't have to worry about powering it. You could just.
I'm going to find out where he's staying and go steal his doorbell.
Yeah.
Just held on with mounting putty.
Yeah.
That's right. You have to pull hard.
That's really interesting, Mike. I know you thought it was a good product for Airbnb renters.
Everyone involved in renting Airbnb should be using this. It's just a fantastic. So the biggest thing. So we've stayed in a lot of countries that are not necessarily safe, and when you're in an Airbnb, everyone in the neighborhood knows you're a foreigner with expensive equipment and all this stuff, and so it's kind of a little bit, you get kind of nervous. And with a Ring video doorbell, you come back to the house before you go in. You check to see if anyone has gone in,
right?
And you can see, oh, nobody's gone in, and you walk in with confidence.
Oh, that's really nice. That's a great reason to do that.
I don't have a ring, but I have a Vivid system, and so if somebody comes to my door, I'll get a notice saying somebody's at your door. But by the time I get to look at them, they're usually gone because of the delay. Do you find that you actually can often see the person in real time and interact with them before they actually leave?
Absolutely. Yeah,
I do it all the time.
It's instantaneous almost.
Maybe mine has worse latency.
There's about 10 seconds, 5 to 10 seconds latency in worst case, but that's enough usually to catch the people wait at the door, but they ring the doorbell, they wait 10 seconds.
Yeah, no, my latency I think is about 30 seconds, so that's good to know.
Yeah. No, they've done it right, and I mean that's why Amazon bought them. But you know, Amazon doesn't need to push the envelope. They're doing great. They don't have to take chances with people's privacy. They don't even have to make acquisitions of cameras if that makes people nervous. Now, I'm not a CEO, and I never will be, so I don't maybe understand business. But why would Jeff Bezos take chances like that? Why? I mean,
why their whole business model is based on algorithmically determined sort of behavioral models. So they if you think about what they track and what they do on the Amazon website, and even when you go beyond the website, whether they go where they figure out where you're going, what you're doing, how long the mouse hovers over this. Does that mean you're interested? They're upset. And look at their grocery store, Amazon Go. This is not about a convenient grocery store. This is about a physical brick and mortar grocery store that has the kind of behavioral data that their website has. And so they're obsessed with understanding what people do. And a camera is by far the most valuable sensor for figuring out what's happening in general with human behavior. They can see who's coming, who's going, what time, how long, all this stuff that's happening. And so it's all, they're like Google. It's all about the data. It's about big data and how you can plug in artificial intelligence to get information that enables you to be more competitive in everything you do.
10 years from now,
they're going to take pictures of your grocery bags as you walk in the house and figure out where you're buying your groceries and make sure that they're underbidding.
Wow.
Yeah, maybe.
Wow, that's interesting. 10 years from now, we're going to look back and regret that we weren't more proactive in fighting the growth of Amazon and Google and Facebook.
Are we? Do you think so?
I don't know.
I don't think so. I think things change and happen so quickly that Google and Facebook and Amazon in 10 years may not be what they are now, and there may be somebody else we have to worry about fighting.
Last night, I finally had it. I read this story. By the way, we've reported on this. We've been reporting on this for over a year. Facebook, I've told people for more than a year, don't do Facebook quizzes because Facebook allows a quiz designer not only to get all the information about you because you took the quiz, but, and this is incredibly infuriating, they also allow the quiz designer to get information about your friends. Facebook says, well, wait a minute. No, we only allow that to improve. Let me see if I can find the stupid quote. We're only allowing collection of friends' data to improve user experience in the app. It can't be sold or used for advertising, except that's exactly what Cambridge Analytica did. And now we know for a fact, even though we've known this for a while, we now have a whistleblower who has told the story of how Cambridge Analytica basically stole 50 million Facebook profiles, got all the information they need. Cambridge Analytica is owned by the Robert Mercer family and was run at the time by Steve Bannon. And, of course, the information was intended to be used by Trump during the campaign. Although I don't blame Cambridge Analytica as much as I blame Facebook for even allowing this to happen. And you probably could say that other campaigns had done the same thing. The whistleblower said that they, since early 2014, they built a system that would profile U.S. voters in order to target them with personalized political advertisements. We exploited Facebook to harvest millions of people's profiles and built models to exploit what we knew about them and target their inner demons. This was the basis the entire company was built on.
You know, it's funny because Dan Patterson, who writes for me, was on this story in August of 2016. He was one of the first to write about this. And he was on it from when Ted Cruz's campaign were using Cambridge Analytica. And he was saying that there's just something fishy about this and it doesn't smell right. And it's amazing that we just didn't pay attention, that enough people did not pay attention to this, right?
I was up in Orange a year ago. The Observer, which broke this story, saw the documents, and this was confirmed by a Facebook statement that said that by late 2015, Facebook knew that this information had been harvested on an unprecedented scale. It did not alert users. It took only limited steps to recover and secure the private information. And in fact, this really frustrates me. When Facebook was told by the Observer that we have this information, we're going to go live with a story tomorrow, then and only then they kicked Cambridge Analytica off the platform.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
They knew. They knew.
They knew for years.
And really did nothing. It was completely a cover-up of all of everything that was happening to that. And the thing is that no company can police itself. We need to have legislation that's in place. I'm sorry. Yes, legislation, government, I hear you. But no one can police themselves.
The problem is, I agree with you 100%, Georgia, but Facebook's a black box to Congress and to regulators.
It can't be, right? Like, it can't be.
How do you get that information if they don't want to give it?
Well, if they want to operate in the United States, they're going to have to be able to let people know how something's run. What is the information going to be used for? Their EULAs have to be something that's readable to everyone that's going to be able to deal with it. And we have to reinstate educating people that work in the government about technology, which, we've ended up defunding.
So why doesn't Facebook just relocate to the Philippines? They're already in tight with the Philippine president. We've already seen accusations leveled at Facebook saying that they are actively supporting the regime of Duterte over there, who's
horrible.
Quite, I don't want to get too carried away, but carrying out terrible things against the citizens. So Facebook could just up from Silicon Valley and relocate to the Philippines and continue on, and the U.S. government has effectively zero control, right?
Yeah, it's true. Like, the thing is, there are 3 companies right now that are disrupting markets, that are turning society upside down in so many ways. And it's because they are 5 to 10 years ahead of everybody else on data, and they know more about us than we know about ourselves, and they're using that data to monetize the living crap, out of everything that they have. And they are incented to keep that as private and as proprietary as possible, because it's a gold mine, right? It's an absolute gold mine. And
they're incentive to keep it to themselves, because if they give it away, they lose control. Somebody else can monetize. So the thing here is that I'm willing to bet a substantial sum of money that the executives inside of Facebook are mega pissed that someone else is making money from their data. Right?
That's the problem with Cambridge Analytica.
They're not making that much.
You're supposed to buy that from us. What do you get?
Exactly.
And the thing that frustrates me is I don't take Facebook quizzes because I know That gives them your information. That's you see these quizzes. Which Game of Thrones character are you? Are you smarter than a 5th grader? How's your spelling? And I see so many people on my timeline saying, "See how smart I am? I'm in the 99th percentile in spelling." I'm saying, "You're not smart. You're a moron. You just took that quiz. That was a dopey quiz. That was made-up quiz. They just wanted your personal information." But you know what really frosts me is I don't take the quiz. Doesn't matter. My friends did. They got my information. And that's infuriating.
It's true. It was like 270,000 people downloaded the app and 500 million people's information is out there. Yeah. So that's a huge amount of people that did not do it. And you're still, because you're part of the ecosystem, in the end, the only thing that matters to Facebook is if you delete Facebook and ask them to delete all the data that they have on you because they're going to keep it anyways. And in the end, the amount of media literacy that we teach to our children and to ourselves, like we are so easily sucked into these applications for internet points that it's pretty sad.
The good news is, thanks to the EU and the GDPR, Facebook now has a way to actually permanently delete your information. In the past, when you got off of Facebook, they would deactivate your account for 6 months, hoping that you would at some point accidentally log in and they go, "Oh, welcome back." By the way, when you leave Facebook, I should have done this on the air because it's hysterical. They put pictures of all your friends and they look sad and they say, it literally said, "Georgia Dow is so sorry you're leaving Facebook. Do you want to send her a note telling her why?" It's the most offensive
emotional blackmail.
Oh, yeah. MG. So now you can do a complete delete of your Facebook data, and I really think this is because coming in May, they were going to get in trouble with the EU if they didn't offer this. So it's not just deactivating. It does still take 2 weeks. So last night, and I see here Facebook saying it'll take 90 days to delete all the things you've posted. Well, we'll see. Why would it take 90 days? Aren't computers a little faster?
Because
they're hoping you're going to come back.
Right.
Caches. It's not just the data that's in the primary system, but to do a complete deletion, you have to reach into all of the backups.
Well, I hope they do this. Anyway, I said this is it. The only way to really punish Facebook, yes, they should be regulated. Yes, Mark Warner's honest ads bill should go through, and that should require that, just as on radio and TV, political ads you have to be identified. You have to say this ad was paid for by so and so. That's not a requirement in digital advertising. It should be. That I hope happens, but it's still not going to. Don't we know Mark Zuckerberg well enough by now? That's not going to stop.
Are we ever going to see an adult in charge of these companies, like an absolute grown-up, instead of these overblown teenagers that actually sort of
grown-ups really better?
He's a grown-up. He's maximizing revenue. This is a grown-up who has become one of the richest men in the world. That's a grown-up.
Grown-ups are no better. Grown-ups are no better. In the end, any of these companies, all they want to do is make money. And I get it, but we have to make sure that we
I don't even blame Facebook or the engineers. They're doing what, this is capitalism. They're doing what they have a fiduciary responsibility to their shareholders to do, maximize profit. They're supposed to do it legally. Okay, honestly, that's probably not right, but they're not completely legal. But they're trying their best to be sort of quasi legal, but they're maximizing profit. That's fine. So instead of saying let's regulate them, I'm going to vote with my feet. And by the way, this is not the first time I've quit Facebook, but this is the last time. I'm never going back.
I'm going to remember, Leo.
No, I'm never going back.
Remember when you go back to Facebook, I'm going to be like,
I don't think I'm alone in this. We learned Facebook even said that 2 million fewer users under 18 in the past year. I think this is the beginning of an exodus, and I really believe this might be the final straw for a lot of users.
I don't know, but the thing is, the story is the data. The data is the story, right? It's not, Cambridge Analytica is not making that much money. They were able to do this because of what Facebook has and the data that they have. And that data is a gold mine. Data is the new oil. Data is where the money is. And like I said, there's 3 companies that are so far ahead of everybody else. Google. Amazon,
and
Facebook.
They
have
Alibaba.
so much.
No, there's a bunch of others. Tencent, Alibaba. You're forgetting the rest of the world.
Get ready. There's going to be a million. WeChat. There's going to be a million.
Are amazing, and they're ahead. But in terms of global reach, right? They're still so focused on the Chinese market that they will eventually be global companies, but they aren't currently. But those three companies are and because they're in they have very, very close relationships with their government. They're a bit protected for the moment. But those three companies that I mentioned, they have really been able to run roughshod over the entire globe, with the exception of the EU, and basically be able to do whatever they want with all this data and have no transparency about what they're doing. And that's the problem. Cambridge Analytica, is just like a gnat that was able to use this platform to siphon a little bit off, right? The real problem, the real issue is the data and the fact that we have no regulation about it. And we're getting later and later in the game. And the EU and GDPR is making a difference, because these companies, as well as a lot of others, they essentially are making that their baseline. If they're going to have to do that there, then, in Europe to be in that market, then it is having an effect on what they're doing in other markets as well, because it's just less expensive for them to get back to fiduciary responsibility. But, we still have this huge problem that we just haven't woken up to the fact that, that data is the new oil, and we can't let it be the wild, wild west.
Yeah. And even if they're operating somewhere else, if you put legislation in place that if you're operating here as well, which they want to, and the States is a huge area for them, so then they'll end up falling into line. And we need to, in the end, what we need, though, is media literacy. We need to teach our kids how to deal with social media, what's happening with it, and why. And I think that, old data is worth nothing. And old is a really short period of time when we talk about the technological age. So if a lot of people, if there's an exodus from Facebook, which, I don't use Facebook, so I think that would be great. But most of the young kids, they're still using other sets of social media, and our brains are primed for wanting to get those clicks on social media. That validation is going less and less with real people and more with internet clicks. And we're primed for that.
I have to say that it's easy to leave Facebook these days because it's not that compelling, to be honest. And if you're going to leave Facebook, you should also leave Facebook's WhatsApp and Instagram as well. But I haven't left Google, and I haven't left Amazon, and that'd be a lot harder to leave Google, right?
Yeah.
What am I going to do? Bing?
DuckDuckGo is sad. DuckDuckGo, I use it. It's sad. I'm just going to say it.
It's hard.
It's sad.
And I would have to give up Gmail. I would have to give up a lot of things. I actually did move my main mail account off Gmail. I used to use Gmail. I don't anymore. But it's a lot harder. It's easy to leave Facebook. So I'm putting a stake in the sand here, but I admit it's challenging. And I still buy a ton of stuff from Amazon. And Amazon arguably has more real data on me than Facebook did, because they know everything I purchase. They have microphones in my house.
Yeah, but Amazon, I think that's the elephant in the room here is the political angle, and we haven't touched on that. The simple fact is that the data that Facebook let their partners, because these were signed up, legally obligated partners who promised not to steal the data, but they stole the data anyway, highlights the fact that Facebook has very little control over its data, had very little, and even now has. I agree. Once you're a Facebook employee, you can basically do anything you like. And the only reason we haven't seen more of this is just sheer blind luck.
Facebook seems to me to be more blatant than any other of these other companies.
It's stupid. It is the most stupid technology company. Google is not being caught up in politics. Amazon is not being caught up in politics. Facebook consistently makes horrendous, unforced errors in the face of every political situation. So every time something comes out about Russia, Facebook says, no, not us. And then somebody comes up with the evidence and say, oh, yeah, you got us. And then it goes through again.
So frustrating.
Yeah, right?
So Greg, you're saying that them asking for all the information to be destroyed wasn't enough for them to do? Because they just asked, and then they were okay with it. They said that they did.
There's nothing they can do. All they can do is legally say, you have to agree and sign an agreement. And if they find out later on, then they can sue, blah, 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 blah. But the horse has got the gate's open. The horse is gone. But the real issue here is that Cambridge Analytica was a UK company funded by alt-right, run by Steve Bannon, which is in Trump's government. The whole alt-right got involved in the Brexit thing here in the UK. We've now got the Information Commissioner's Office in the UK announcing that they will open an investigation into this whole issue. So Facebook is now under fire. You're talking about the right wing of the American government is now looking at Facebook going, are you with us or are you against us? Then you've got scary. Cambridge Analytica getting onto the right wing over here, and they're using it, and they're trying to say,
this is scary.
Yeah.
I mean, if you want to create an authoritarian regime, Facebook's your best friend.
And that's exactly what they've done in the Philippines under Duterte. Same thing in Myanmar. Same thing's happening in many other countries. Facebook has been co-opted by governments, strongman governments, to control the population and to control the flow of information. And there's no reason for Facebook to stay in the US. It could just bunk out at any time, except for the fact that the US is the market which generates the most revenue for them. But they could probably just scoot off if they needed to, if they thought the pressure. And they're childish enough. I mean, your average Silicon Valley executive has the mental brain power of a 16-year-old with a lot of hormones. They're so competitive. They're so inwardly looking. They're so focused on, winning. They're not focused on the money as much as they are on the winning. They're socially incompetent to the level where I'm winning if I'm making more money.
Right.
And so they're not actually following capitalism. They're not following any rules of society. They're just trying to win blindly, aggressively, over and over and over. Win, win, win. And the way that I keep score about winning is to make more money. And at some point, that's going to come off the rails because there's no more money to make, I suspect, or something else happens.
So just to play devil's advocate here, I do think that to a degree, Mark Zuckerberg's aware of the problem. And I think you've seen him the last couple of years in pretty clear some statements knowing that this thing has gotten out of control and he knows there's some serious problems. I mean, his number one, his New Year's resolution, right, for this year was fix Facebook. That's a pretty bold statement. That's basically telling everybody, including your shareholders, that something's broken and needs to be fixed.
Yeah, only after someone shoved his face right into it. He didn't work it out for himself. Somebody had to slam his face into the desk and go, look, bang, bang, bang. His head got slammed into the desk 10, 12, 14 times before he went, oh, yeah, there's a problem.
No doubt. But he did admit it. He didn't just, he wasn't just blathering on about,
he says fix it, but I'd be interested to see what he's actually doing to fix it. The latest thing is Facebook told CNN, oh, it was a rogue employee. We figured out it was a rogue employee that gave up all that information. So it wasn't our fault. My real problem is that if you're a normal person using Facebook, it's a very attractive thing. It's how you stay in touch with family and friends. You discover your high school sweetheart and what she's been up to. It's very attractive. Facebook acts as if you're giving them information, but they're keeping it private. You have control of it. You say who's a friend, who's an acquaintance, who is not to see your stuff. They really act as if you are controlling that information. They don't tell people that when you take a quiz, you're giving all your information to that company and you're giving up all your friends. I mean,
Facebook doesn't do it.
They don't tell you that.
They don't do it anymore because they realize that giving away the data meant other people were making money off Facebook's platform.
Oh, they don't do that third parties?
No, I don't think so.
They do still. You can check it. You can check it on or off if you choose. But people usually don't even read that or know what they're doing. I think that, I would love to think that Zuckerberg is actually, wants to fix Facebook, because who knows what that means. But the best way to tell if someone's behavior in the future is by their behavior in the past. And they waited 2 years to be able to deal with this. They were not transparent about it. They only deleted them from their system when they found out. And the information was still there anyways. So we know that in the end, their most important thing was Facebook and keep saving face and making the most amount of money. So no, I don't think that they really want to make a difference in the world or try to do the right thing. I think that they'll only do that if they have to, or if it ends up hurting their bottom line by people deleting Facebook. And in the end, that's really legislation, I think, is important. But I think that you're right, Leo, that, deleting Facebook is the biggest message that you could send to them. And if there's a huge exodus, they'll start to listen.
Legislation that Facebook wrote went into effect or went up for a vote and looks like will go into effect in the state of Maryland.
Oh, and tell us about that.
Simultaneously.
What was that?
Right. So if you'll remember, every big media outlet was touting their exclusive sit down with Sheryl Sandberg. And of course, she was on a media tour. where over and over again she talked about industry-leading industry-leading thoughts, industry-leading ideas, industry-leading policies, which was all lobbyist code for regulation. So days before, like while she's doing this and days before Zuckerberg shows up on the Hill, Facebook was meeting with lawmakers in different states, one of them being Maryland, where, and I can find the link to this, but Facebook wrote the legislation.
See, on the surface of this sounds like good legislation. Plans to regulate political ads on Facebook. Right,
but so like nothing is like everything that happened with Zuckerberg giving testimony. That was all for show.
Theater.
That was all for show. But and so everybody was making fun of it, and they were very distracted. But on the back end, we were getting scraped on the back end.
We got scraped on the back end, folks. So Will Castleberry, Facebook's vice president for state policy, says, yeah, we helped draft the Maryland legislation, and we look forward to implementing it. Now, that's not necessarily bad. That means they want to get the heat off of them. Maybe they found a way that they think will help.
We believe, but Leo, go back. So this was the key thing.
We believe this bill will be a national model for the other 49 states to follow. Avoiding, by the way, federal regulation, right?
Right. And if there's some regulation that gets started, that takes all of the heat off of Zuckerberg, because technically nobody broke any laws. So this is all about avoiding. This is all about showing up in public, keeping the share price high, and avoiding federal regulation.
So part of the problem is that the laws that affect broadcasters about political ads, that they have to, for instance, reveal who bought the ad, don't apply to digital.
Right.
And this is the federal laws, the Honest Ads Act. Is Facebook supporting the Honest Ads Act? I think they are. Or not. This Maryland law looks a lot like the Honest Ads Act. It says, here, this is an article from the Baltimore Sun. It resembles legislation in Congress aimed at monitoring political advertising on social media. It would affect Google, by the way, as well as Facebook. New York, California, and Connecticut also weighing their own measures. We want to keep the platforms accountable. I'm trying to find the part where it says what.
Yeah, whether they are or not, they will have to. Really what all of this is about at the end is that, and I know I've said this before on the show, but there's 3 companies that know data better than anybody else, and they're eating the world, they're disrupting industries, and they are undermining the privacy of people every single day, more and more, right? Facebook, Amazon, and Google. And they're doing it largely with a black box of data that they control, and that, data being the new oil, they're using that to become one of the, 3 of the most powerful companies in the history of humanity. And the transparency issue is a big part of the issue. Facebook, the least transparent. Amazon somewhere in the middle, Google a little bit more transparent of what they do with the data and all that. So all of these companies, you can bet over the coming years are going to be under enormous pressure to tell what data they're actually collecting, what they do with it, what it's worth to them, and what they can do to actually empower people to better understand this and take responsibility for it.
Well, it is so interesting. I think what you said is such a great summary of what we're dealing with here, and the analogy as data as the new oil is a really compelling one. And what's fascinating about that is this is the first time probably in human history when the oil or the diamonds or the gold or whatever it is actually us.
Yes.
And we're being mined.
We're being mined. We're being mined for our money. It's basically an outgrowth of the advertising industry plus a lot more on top of that. And shouldn't we at least know when we're being mined, right?
Yes.
And when we're offering up bits of ourselves to somebody who's going to then turn around and sell to us? It's almost like we are giving something away and then being asked to buy it back through purchases. That we make due to targeting. I
have to say, though, that on the face of it, the idea that Facebook would work with Maryland legislators to try to craft something that is both, helpful and something that Facebook could live with is not necessarily a bad thing. That's how politics works, Amy, right? You're trying to reach consensus.
And it's not unprecedented.
Not at all.
I mean, that is what lobbying is.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
So, I mean, I think that, my job is to collect data and to model it and to figure out what all of it means and what the next order risk and opportunity is many, many years into the future.
Right.
But one of the early signals that we look for are contradictions. So to me, it was very, these were some weak signals that I was paying attention to over the past couple of weeks. The fact that sort of quietly this legislation was being written, it potentially becomes the model. It eludes some regulatory challenges right around the same time that it becomes apparent that our data is being continually mined, refined, and productized, but in ways that we may not have thought through or intended. All this sort of constellation of interesting facts and data over the past couple of weeks, I think points us in a direction that we should be concerned about. But it's hard to be concerned and to really think through things when the spectacle is so fascinating and fun. I mean, it was fun to watch all of this happening, right?
Yeah.
Was it fun for everybody, though? I mean, I think it was fun for us.
It didn't look like it was fun for Mark.
I think that most people, if you ask them, did you see what happened this week? They'd be like, oh, yeah, Mark Zuckerberg, he looks like Data from Star Trek.
Yeah.
That's it.
That was it.
That's what most people got out of that. Mark Zuckerberg is boring.
You think, Amy, that Mark walked away saying, yes, victory?
I mean, I would have if I was him. Yeah. He escaped any serious questions. Clearly, I mean, did you hear some of the questions? I think it was Senator Orrin Hatch who was trying to suss out whether or not Facebook and Twitter were kind of the same thing.
I know.
And I think one of the questions,
that was depressing.
I might have him confused with Lindsey Graham, but somebody asked the question, is Twitter the same as Facebook? And it's like, it wasn't even rhetorical. It wasn't, I mean, so, I mean, he escaped unscathed. If he had come on, if he had gone in front of people who wouldn't have had to ask, people were asking questions about whether or not, even if you log out of Facebook, you're still being tracked. It's a clear indication that they don't understand cookies, right?
Yeah.
So if he had actually faced people that asked serious questions, or if anybody who was up there that didn't understand the tech could have and would have pressed on the other sort of civil liberties piece of this, I think it would have been different.
I think the platform was designed not to even allow that had somebody wanted to. And I observed this before it began. I said, this is really just going to be a chance for a member of Congress to stand up, say something that they can use in an ad later, because in the Senate, they got 5 minutes.
Yeah.
In the House, they got 4 minutes. There was no time for follow-up. Right. Mark very cleverly used up the clock by, doing longer answers, which many members of Congress were at pains to interrupt, trying to get their second question in.
Yeah. He even drank his water slowly.
Yeah. Whoever designed it with Facebook in mind, frankly. It wasn't so... Yeah. I don't know that I don't want to be Alex Jones here and a conspiracy theorist. But
I don't think it's conspiracy just to say that
they're in each other's pockets.
Well, they played the game.
They literally relied on Facebook to get elected. I mean, that was a good, how much money did each one of those? There's a great story somewhere. They
all got money from Mark,
and not just the tangible, not the obvious money, but every one of them relied on Facebook to get elected. Every one of them.
That's a larger issue that probably isn't for us, but there's the larger political issue. We talked about this on Wednesday. There's an economic theory, I think it's called the Peltzman theory, that there are three constituents here. There's monopolies, big business, there's politicians, and there's users. And they each have kind of differing goals. The politicians want to get reelected. The users want to pay less, or in the case of Facebook where it's free, maybe, get spied on less. And the big businesses want as minimal regulation as they can get to continue on with what they're doing. And what happens is you get this kind of nice little feedback loop and everybody gets kind of what they want. Nobody is 100% happy, but at the same time, we don't get any kind of, the voters really don't get any kind of privacy protection or regulation of these companies because that's not what politicians are looking for. In fact, Facebook's very helpful to them. They're not trying to shut down Facebook.
No, and if there was somebody, I wish I could remember who wrote this piece, but there was a piece sort of documenting which politicians went up to Zuckerberg afterward and basically fawned over him.
Yeah.
We're so proud of what you started in your dorm room.
He's a kingmaker.
we can't. This is the symbol of American success. There was, I don't think, a lot of interest in actually angering or unsettling him outside of that grandstanding, for sure. But I think it would be interesting to talk for a second about whether or not people would have the appetite to pay for a service like Facebook. We were just talking about that.
They brought that up,
journalism. They brought it up. People have been bringing it up for the whole week. Hey, what if we paid for it? Do you need to change your business model, Facebook? And I think this is, again, I keep coming back to this, but it's sort of a personal responsibility thing. I don't think that there's any actual appetite for paying for social media. As soon as any service starts to bring up a fee, people freak out and walk away, which is weird because we'll pay what, like $12, $13, $14 to go to the movies?
Yeah.
It's kind of confounding.
As much time as people spend on it. I mean, I completely agree completely. I never thought people would pay for the information either, that it would survive more than a year, but they did eventually.
Well, there's a key difference, though. There have been plenty of studies. The information was always a paid product.
Right.
The challenge is there's a cognitive bias.
Once it's free,
happens when something has been when something was free, and now you're being compelled for whatever reason to pay. That, it feels like something is being taken away from us. And historically speaking, regardless of what industry or field it is, we won't do it.
It does work sometimes. Like, think about with cell phones. We completely destroyed the value of cell phones for about 5 or 6 years there. And then eventually we got to the point where now we're paying, whatever, $40 a month or $30 a month or having to buy one separately.
But it was a different type of phone. That the free, you're talking about the free model?
Right. Well, when it used to be, you get a free upgrade, you get, you pay $200 for your phone, which was really, massively subsidized. Now
in Japan, you would get the phones for free. You would get a free phone. When I lived there, the early smartphones were free. You just signed up for the service. But once the truly smartphones hit, the first smartphone that I had was an iPod. From NTT Docomo, which was a totally different kind of phone. Everything else was free, but you had to pay for that. We've shifted over to the fancy models like that people pay for, because there's never been an alternative. There's never been a way not to pay for a brand new iPhone.
There's also this sort of half-paid model. I mean, I live in Berkeley. There's a regional news site called Berkeley Side, which I'm a huge fan of. They've done a fantastic job creating a serious local publication that's internet only, and it's first in the nation. They just raised $1 million from its readers in a direct public offering.
Wow,
interesting.
Small local news,
isn't that interesting?
High quality
that's
product.
Berkeley, though.
Totally free.
That's Berkeley.
But
that's Berkeley.
There's something to be said though. Like, you do a very good job, and then you say, look, and it's kind of the NPR model too, right? Like, please pay for this thing. We're going to give it to you for free. But we're going to use guilt.
Guilt works. I mean, guilt absolutely works.
It's not democratic, though. It's fundamentally undemocratic. And that's part of the problem I have, is that news especially, I'm kind of the opinion all software should be free, that the paid software model is a broken model. And certainly social networks should all be free. And news should be free. You've got to find other ways to monetize it, because it's undemocratic to say that only people who can afford news should be able to get the good news, and the rest of you are going to get fake news and crappy news and link-baity news. That's not right.
And yet when freedom of the press started, like, everybody had to pay to get that sheet,
the broadsheet.
The broadsheet, right? So
it's one of the reasons we've never charged for TWiT.
One person bought it, and then other people they shared it, talked about it, whatever, shared it around, So I think that it's
kind of the HBO model. Like, we know people steal it, but some of you are going to pay for it, and it all works out in the end.
The LA Times accidentally ran a new business model experiment without even realizing it. A couple weeks ago, their page loads times were like really, really slow, and people couldn't figure out what was going on. And a friend of mine was like poking around, and somebody was using their site to mine for Bitcoins.
Oh my God.
So they had been hacked in a weird way,
my God.
Also maybe like a genius way to raise some cash.
Yeah.
Right.
Just not for the LA Times, unfortunately.
And to close the loop on the Facebook thing, I do think, Facebook is primarily over, and every under 30, there's hardly any people that are actively engaged on Facebook. So what's next is the important question. And for the hearings themselves, I think that you have to take what happened, not just in the event itself, which was somewhat sad and disappointing and, not what it could have been or should have been, but think of it as a first step or maybe second step, right? Because they did call after the election a few of these tech heads before the Congress to testify. Again, it's about the scrutiny coming on to these folks about the way that they use data. And while this wasn't ideal, it wasn't what it could have been or should have been.
It's a start.
It is a start, and you're going to increasingly in the coming years see more pressure on them to be transparent. And the Maryland legislation, I think, is another step in that direction. They're going to be more transparent about what data they take, how they use it, how much it's worth, and then what they can do to give people control of their own data.
Well, and somebody in the chat room brought this up, and maybe not in exactly this way, but also there's the possibility that a transparency here, I'm going to sell your data to marketers. You will see ads related to the things that you do on this platform. If you would like to not receive these ads, it will cost you $10 to use a month to use the platform.
Yeah, and I bet most people would say, "Fine, I don't want to
pay it."
Yeah, I don't. Am I wrong? I don't have a problem with Facebook using my information to sell ads. That's not where the issue is. The issue is more using my mood to take advantage of me to sell ads, or selling my information to a foreign government, or using my information, in kind of sleazier ways than just straight up. You talked about Jeeps. You should see Jeep ads. What would be wrong with that? You're actually interested in Jeeps.
They're taking
Wouldn't
more
you prefer
data
ads?
than what they're telling us. The problem
They're taking more data and they're using it in ways that are kind of not so nice.
And they're pushing
and we're
the very
talking about what's already happened. I mean, Facebook saying if at the end of all of this, the end result is we'll tell you, we'll give you the opportunity to opt out so that we won't use your data to surface ads. Is sort of like not that sort of shields us from everything that's coming. The next social networks are going to be part of mixed reality, not text and photo and video based social networks that we have right now.
Now's the time that I get to work on social networks that don't rely on surveillance capitalism to survive. There must be some other way to create the next thing that doesn't require this kind of skeezy invasion of privacy. Or is that not going to happen?
TwitBook?
TwitBook. I like it. Well, as we know now, at the end of 2018, Apple announced new phones this year, stopped selling the iPhone 10. At least we think so. There have been rumors in the last few weeks that Apple might be making the iPhone 10 again. Turns out it was pretty darn popular. In fact, we had this story about how popular iPhone 10 turned out to be.
Right, okay, so it's been a headline-grabbing week for Apple. When has it not been? But we did have to report that when it comes to actual smartphone sales, Apple and the product line are taking over a third of the entire revenue straight out the bat. So all those mobile phone manufacturers out there, the billions of smartphones out there, Apple is sucking it up. Now, we have a mixed panel here. Some Apple users, some Android users. Mike, you've actually bought your wood-framed iPad here. You have you haven't gone for the iPhone 10 or X, depending on how you describe it.
No.
10 or X, which one would
10.
Yeah.
Go with the 10, yep, because I think the next one's going to be an 11. They pulled a Microsoft. They skipped a generation. There has been no iPhone 9. But yeah, iPhone 10 for sure. iPhone
7, 8, 9, or sorry.
One of the things I was surprised about, obviously, Apple always dominates profits. If you think about what does Apple make, the one thing they make better than anyone is profits.
Mm-hmm.
But iPhone 10 actually had much significantly higher profits than any of the other iPhones. The numbers
are so ridiculously priced. Or?
Yeah, well, I guess. We're probably going to talk about the cost of the Samsung screen and so on. So it's expensive for them to make, it's amazing they got as many people to buy it as they did. But 35% of the industry's profits were the iPhone 10, 19% the iPhone 8, 15% the iPhone 8 Plus, 6% iPhone 7, 5% iPhone 7. The first non-Apple device on the list is the Galaxy Note 8 at 3.9%, basically 4% of the industry profit. So Apple, once again, is winning it all. And this doesn't even tell you what they're making on app sales. They get a third of all the app sales. What they're getting on the streaming services like Apple Music and so on. It goes on and on and on. They make money on everything, every aspect of the, just about every aspect of the phones. But this is just
before selling the hardware. And it's the business story of, I think, the decade or the millennium or something like that. They just are printing money. And it's kind of ridiculous. They're on track to be the first $1 trillion valuation company.
I think Amazon might get there first. I'm not sure.
Could be. It could be.
There's a fight for it at the moment.
Not if President Trump has anything to do with it.
Yes. Well, we may come on to that later on. I mean, Greg and Dwight, what's your view on this? I mean, are you Apple fanboys? Are you Android users? Are you?
I am an Apple user, and I use pretty much all their products. It's not a surprise they are aiming at the high end of the market, where the profits naturally are better. They've made Apple an aspirational brand, so you want to have it, maybe even if you can't afford it. And they have a variety of products, in a variety of price ranges. So I think they're being very smart about it. The question is how much can they sustain? They have earnings coming up on May 1st, and there have been several analysts who have said, well, they're just not doing as well as expected on the iPhone 10, and so we'll get a better look at what is actually going to happen when those earnings drop.
So I'm an Apple user or an Apple consumer. I'm not a fanboy. I was a fanboy, but increasingly I'm less inspired by Apple's going forward. I think the price is getting out of whack with the value being delivered. So, as it says here, 21% of the total revenue goes to Apple, but they make 35% of the total industry profits. I've heard different numbers. I heard they sort of take 30% of the total revenue, but 70% of the total profits or whatever. But either way, Apple's is working in the premium end of the market and charging premium pricing that it has a vast profit margin. But then not only that, but part of the reason they're making the profit margin is a couple of things. One is security. Unlike a Microsoft or an Android, your device is more or less secure, although there's signs that there's cracks in that coming forward. It's not buggy compared to anybody else's smartphones or anybody else's products. And so they do actually have a reason for being regarded as a premium supplier. But I think the other thing that we are not covering here that's not covered in this report, of course, is that Apple is very much increasing its ARPU, avenue revenue per customer, or average revenue per user, to be literal, by having things like the headphones, the Apple earphones they've got with the X1 chip inside, Apple TVs. The Mac is increasingly an accessory to the iPhone, the App Store, the music, the HomePod. All those accessories mean that you're not just buying the phone anymore. The phone is the linchpin of an entire ecosystem around which you're going to buy one or more of those fries with the iPhone burger. And I think you don't underestimate that part of the strategy.
Greg, just to follow up on that and clarify, you said that your understanding was that the Apple was north of 70% total profits. That used to be the case, and now they're up to 87%. The 35% is the iPhone 10 alone. So the iPhone 10 by itself as one of the many profitable Apple devices makes more profit than the top 600 Android makers combined.
It's utterly bonkers. I mean, it's almost like with Android, it's a race to the bottom, whereas Apple has just said, yeah, let's make this a premium thing. But then it isn't really reflected in their other product lines. In that, I mean, Greg, you said this is the linchpin, but I know a lot of MacBook users who are really, really annoyed at the moment that their laptops are not getting love. We're using outdated hardware. They've just said that the next MacBook isn't going to be coming through the line until 2019. I mean, has Apple given up on laptops?
I think there's a few things happening there. One is Intel's product line has been disrupted. They've missed a couple of generations in the CPUs. We always expected to see Intel release new CPUs. They did the tick-tock, and we expected them to happen every year. And then Intel shifted to a 3-year strategy. And I just have the sense, and this is just pure speculation on my part, Apple was doing something, and they missed a generation or two because whatever it was they were working on didn't work. So I know that, for example, Intel completely failed to deliver on mobile processors and mobile CPUs.
Twice.
And yeah, that's right. And so if you were betting, you had a whole production line ready to go, and then Intel suddenly pulls the pin on that CPU that they were going to push out there, and you're Apple, because Apple had puts all of its weight behind a single product. there's not like, Samsung, they have like 9 to 10 product families. Apple has 2 smartphones in the market today, basically the X and the 8. They don't have this massive diversity which allows them to fail in one product line and fail over. They go all the way in. So if Intel pulled the product line too late, then Apple might not have had a backup strategy in place, and that's why we haven't seen the iteration. So I'm not entirely sure that putting the blame at Apple's feet is the thing to do. Of course it is, because it's up to them to meet the market and meet users' expectations and to manage user expectation. I think that's the thing that Apple's failed to do here. We have an expectation as Apple customers to see a refresh cycle on the Mac roughly every 2 years, a major trend. And we haven't seen that. And they haven't come out and talked about it or been public about it. And we really feel a bit abandoned. Like, I'm sitting here with a 2012 MacBook waiting patiently for the next one because I'm not leaving my ports behind.
This was the company Google bought briefly until they realized that Boston Dynamics was doing robots for the military. Scary robots like this running robot. I think this is the same robot, Atlas, that they showed earlier, one of the Boston Dynamics employees knocking over with a stick. And the robot was so nice and just got up and kept doing things. But I have to think it's kind of making a list, right? Look at it, can jump.
I know, like a baby when it does that. Like,
yeah, I know,
sort
it's
of
cute.
like thinks about it.
Would you like one of these Boston Dynamics for your very own?
What I'd like to know is how much range does it? I mean, how much of a battery does that thing have?
90 minutes.
90
not that specific one, but the one they're about to sell. 90 minutes.
In 2019, they announced this at TechCrunch Disrupt this week. Boston Dynamics is going to start selling their dog.
Oh. That's the 90-minute one.
Spot Mini. This is a video that they posted on YouTube of it autonomously navigating their office and labs. Now, they had to run it through once to get an image. So the robot, do you really want this in your house? They're speeding it up here.
You've seen the other video where it opens the door, and then lets
you can get one with a articulated arm.
Yeah,
be perfect for pinching people. The robot, they say it's the quietest robot they've ever made. I mean, I don't know how quiet it is, but it doesn't sound like a steam engine coming at you anyway.
No, just give me a canine.
This is autonomous. This is like an autonomous vehicle. This is like the DARPA Grand Challenge.
I'd rather pick up the dog poop instead of having one of these.
Well, Kevin Rose suggested they cover it with fur. I think that's probably. I don't know. I don't know if it'll look like this when they sell it. I don't know how
they didn't
expensive
cover the little
it'll be.
Sony dog with fur.
The
and
that yeah, but it looks dog-like. This
That's
thing
true.
looks. I don't know.
This thing looks
scary.
like a crawler.
Yeah.
Like a.
Well, wait till you see this. You can't get away from it by running upstairs. It's just going to follow you.
Have you seen the Black Mirror episode Hard Metal or
not yet?
Heavy Metal?
Is it the new?
It's from the latest series.
Yeah, no, I'm not caught up yet. I can't wait. I love that show.
At least it does stairs slowly, so if you run up the stairs, you might be okay.
You could run back down. Yeah.
And then kick it.
By the way, it doesn't go forward downstairs. It goes backwards, just like me.
So how much is this thing going to cost?
They don't say, but they do say they're going to sell it to end users in 2019.
I mean,
it's Spot Mini.
This looks expensive.
It does look really expensive.
$10,000.
Sounds like you know about this. If you said 90 minutes, have you talked with the people?
I was just brushing up before we went on there.
The Google folks sold this company. They realized it's kind of creepy for Google to own.
Now.
Yeah, that's what's really interesting. Sun-san, Masayoshi Son, who has pledged a $100 billion investment in Silicon Valley Tech.
$100 billion.
He's already spent $30 billion of it. He bought Sprint. Is now the owner of these scary robots.
He also bought a big chunk of Uber.
Did he?
Yeah.
He's got money to spend.
He bought about 15% of Uber.
Is it interesting? I don't really understand where all that money came from. SoftBank was originally a software distributor, I think, right? That's where the name came from.
Yep, owner of Ziff Davis.
They bought Ziff Davis, I remember, yeah. I was still working there when we had to call him Sun-san. By the way, that sound, I'm not making baseball caps for everybody in the audience. That's the Spot Mini still running around. Does sound like an embroidery machine, though.
I mean, it's cute. I don't know. It's growing on me after a minute.
It doesn't have any personality.
I've always wanted a robot dog.
I mean, really, the technology is kind of impressive, right? And those legs, you see how they went sideways too? They don't just go forwards and backwards. I am Spot. What if it had John Legend's voice? Now how much would you pay?
I don't. Oh, John
We'll get back to our best of episode in just a little bit. I'll tell you one of the things, the best ofs for me, and it's not just been this year, for the last 10 years, LastPass, my password manager. You use LastPass, right? If you use LastPass, listen to this commercial anyway. So you can tell your friends why they should get LastPass. Actually, you might want to tell the boss, because we use LastPass at work. Let me tell you, it's one thing to protect yourself, but if you're a business, you have to remember, you know, you can have all the best IT in the world, and we do here. Russell's great. He protects us against all sorts of threats. But your employees could be the weak link. They might be using bad passwords. Remember, you have to give them access to your bank account, your website, your bookkeeping, your servers, all the stuff that you use on the internet. They have access to, and they may not have the best password hygiene, if you know what I mean. Look around your office, see if there's a Post-it note stuck on a monitor like that with a corporate password on it. I bet there is. This is why you need LastPass. No more Post-it notes. Throw them away. In fact, your employees will love it. LastPass generates long, strong passwords that you can't remember. But you don't have to remember, because LastPass keeps track of it in the password vault. LastPass is strong encrypted. In fact, we ran it through Steve Gibson, because I wanted to make sure, before I was recommending this to people, I've been using it forever. Steve interviewed the guy who wrote it, Joe Segrist. He looked at the source code. He said, yeah, they're doing the right things. Things like PBDKF, so that you can't even brute force this thing. And it's only decrypted on device. Even the guys at LastPass can't get to your password vault. Only you can get to your password vault. Of course, they support two-factor. We require our employees to use it. That's another thing you can get with LastPass Enterprise. There's over 100 sane, strong, secure policies you can implement regarding master password length, two-factor authentication. You can have password resets. You really control the whole thing. If an employee leaves, access is revoked. Passwords can be changed automatically. You can even give people passwords without giving them access to the password. They can log in to QuickBooks, but they can't actually see the password. Things like that make a huge difference. LastPass, I trust it so much, we put everything in there, not just passwords, database keys, SSH keys, PGP keys, software licenses, all our business information. I even put my passport and driver's license. Everything's in LastPass. It's what you need, a secure store for the most valuable stuff in your business or in your home. LastPass, they have a great multi-factor authenticator program. I love it because instead of making you memorize 6 digits and entering them in, you press an approve or deny button on your phone. It automatically logs you in. And you can, by the way, as an enterprise user, you can require that. Two-factor is a huge improvement in security in general, and LastPass makes it easy. If you're a Microsoft Active Directory company, you can use your AD credentials for a single sign-on. That's so great. Here's the deal. Choose the LastPass that's right for you. For your business, there's LastPass Teams for businesses of 50 or fewer, and LastPass Enterprise, that's what we use. For individuals, there's LastPass Premium, and actually at home, we use LastPass Families, because that way I could share passwords with my wife. She's my kind of emergency access contact point. So if something happens to me, she can get access to my passwords and settle my affairs, things like that. That's actually really important. I can give you 1,000 reasons to get LastPass. Just do it. Go to lastpass.com/twit. Join the 16 million users and the 43,000 businesses, from leading tech brands like MailChimp to Fortune 500 companies and TWiT, who trust LastPass. It's the #1 most preferred password manager. LastPass.com/twit. Make security a priority in 2019. Back to This Week in Tech and the Roundtable. A great article which made me feel a lot better about GDPR. I have such mixed feelings about GDPR. On the one hand, this general data protection regulation that the EU put into law 2 years ago, but now is actually going to go into effect on Friday, does things that everybody would agree are good. For instance, requires companies that have a data breach to disclose within 72 hours. I mean, really fast. And also put some real teeth into those laws. These regulations have existed, but there was no enforcement in the past. Now there will be. In fact, this is a really good example of what happens if you make a law or you make a regulation. What was there was a privacy? What was the name of the privacy regulation, Patrick? That it's been in effect for a year or two.
I'm not sure which one you're referring to. I mean, there are things like the right to be forgotten.
No, not that. But there's a general privacy regulation that effectively was GDPR but had no teeth, and has been in place for a while. I'll look it up. In any event, the EU decided, well, we've got to have some, if this is going to work, we've got to have a significant penalty, and the penalty is fairly significant. As much as 20 million euros. 20 million euros or 4% of your global revenue, whichever is higher, that's enough even to scare a big company like Google or Facebook. Clearly, it's intended for them. So some things I think I'm in favor of. Then there are other things that I think a lot of people are very worried about, that compliance will be difficult. I read a good article. This is Jacques Mattei, I think you pronounce it. He wrote a piece on his blog called GDPR Hysteria, which calmed me down a lot. He said,
it's in here. It's in here, Leo. It's the European Data Privacy Directive. That was the previous one.
That's it. Which was kind of a first attempt, but didn't do anything because it had no teeth. So he's pointing out, look, this isn't going to happen overnight. You're going to get, if you're out of compliance, you're going to get a warning. They're not. That's the maximum fine. There may not be a fine at all if you fix it. I am in favor of privacy. But I think also here in the States, a lot of people say, "How dare the EU tell us how to run our business?"
Well, they're not. They're telling you that that's what you have to do if you have customers in the EU. They could perfectly make two different sets of rules and settings, one for the EU customers and one for the US customers. Now, of course, it would get interesting reactions from the US customers and the press, I'm guessing, because the EU customers would have settings and rights to delete their data, portability of their data, downloading what you have used on their network. And magically, the U.S. customers wouldn't. So
actually, for a while, we thought Facebook might do that. They might implement it just for EU customers. They said then later, no, we're going to implement it for everybody. In fact, it's great. You can download your Facebook data now. You can delete your Facebook data now if you want. That's a good thing.
Yeah. It's the power of government. Yes, government is sometimes overbearing and cumbersome, but sometimes you need it because it's the only entity that can have some kind of influence on other more, very potent entities like some huge companies.
Yeah.
And I do think that, Europeans have always been more concerned with all of these issues than the Americans for a couple of reasons. Historically, we have more genuine concern about all of this and the way our data is used. And of course, those big companies are usually not in the EU, so we have an easier time looking at them and saying, "Oh, these
right." That's one of the
internet giants.
That's one of the the subtext of all of this is, oh, here comes the EU after successful American companies again.
Yeah, but no one is saying that what is being required of those companies is completely unreasonable.
No, not at all.
Especially for the big ones, right? Yeah. It's things that really they should have implemented themselves a long time ago. And I went off on a tiny rant on Twitter because after the 25th email I received from one of those companies saying, at company X, we value your privacy. And this is why we're doing this.
All of a sudden.
If you valued our privacy, you wouldn't have waited until the law obliged you to do these things to put them into place. I would have preferred that some of them would say, hey, so the GDPR is coming into law and it requires this and this, or so we're making these modifications. You didn't have to put that hypocritical PR spin to it saying, well, of course they did have to do it because that's how they work, but it's a little bit frustrating. But it's, I understand the concerns. And again, I think it's good to ask and discuss them. But overall, I have a hard time justifying a full criticism of this GDPR ensemble of requirements. It seems like things that should have been put into place maybe earlier. And I have to admit that myself, I might have been a little bit skeptical about all of it until a couple of years ago, but I think now it's clear to everyone in Europe that it's needed. And I'm guessing in the US, most people agree.
I agree that it's needed, and I think that you make. I basically agree with everything you said. I do have some questions still about how this is actually going to be enforced. I think if you're a larger company, a Facebook, a Google, a Microsoft, an Apple, a Samsung, an Amazon, you obviously are going to be in compliance because you're going to be watched very carefully. But if you are a Chinese-based company, or if you are Eastern European-based country who's not part of the EU, or if you are just smaller and don't care, I am curious about how these things are actually going to be enforced.
I think actually that's why Leo mentioned this piece specifically, because I read this earlier in the week also, Leo. And the point that he's making is that he's specifically saying, are you just a person that has a blog? Are you going to be on the hook for $20 million or whatever in fines? And he's saying, no, that's not the way that the EU works. Things like the DPD, the European Data Protection Directive, he said that's been in effect for 2 decades.
2 decades.
You've never even heard of it, because the point is not that they wanted to suddenly fine everyone. They wanted to have the laws in the place.
Right.
Right. And I understand that. What I'm saying is I'm not necessarily talking about like your website or a small company who I'm talking about potentially big conglomerates, big industries, big players who are based in countries that just aren't going to care. Like, how are they going to enforce this against someone like Tencent, for instance, or someone else? Like, if someone's really going to come back, I mean, that's becomes the interesting question. Are you going to start blocking access to their traffic? Like how much teeth is this really going to have? And I guess we will have to see on that, because what we've seen before with Right to be Forgotten and other sanctions that have gone against, Google and other companies, those companies tend to fight back even when it is the law. So I don't know.
Yes, but the Right to be Forgotten has been implemented. Initially I thought it was a horrible idea, but it has been implemented by Google, and it seems to work relatively well. Of course, there are always issues in every.
I still think like that one's a horrible law, because instead of saying pull down the original content, they're putting the burden on the search engine to pull down the search results. They're also putting Google in the position of judge and jury. Google has to go through each of these requests and judge whether it has merit or not. That's not something Google should be doing.
Yes, but Leo, this is the practical approach to problems. Sometimes the solution is not perfect, but it's better than doing nothing. This is what we're asking of YouTube, of Facebook, of Twitter. We're telling them, take away the objectionable content within 24 hours. This is horrible. It shouldn't be on the internet. And my initial concern was we're asking private enterprises to be the judge of what is acceptable or not acceptable to say. I agree. This is a valid concern. However, on the other side of it, and I'm sure some people would have more to say about it than me, but you see some horrible things on Twitter. And sometimes you are very frustrated that it's still there and that the accounts aren't blocked. And
so is the right thing to do to go to Google and say, hide that Twitter search result, or to go to Twitter and say, pull the tweet down? And that's the problem I have with Right to be Forgotten. It makes Google responsible for this, not the site that hosts the bad content.
I think in the case of Twitter, obviously you would go to Twitter.
Yes.
But there are many other
But the Right to be Forgotten is about Google.
Yes, absolutely. Right? And it's not about the link to Twitter. If it's a link to Twitter, you're going to go see Twitter. It's a general because in practice, Google is our doorway to the internet, especially in Europe. Remember, they have 80%, 90% market share in Europe.
Andy in Germany's in the chat room, and he says you still have to delete the content from the original sites by yourself. You go to those sites, but the reason Google is in the equation is because they cache all this stuff, so you have to get them to kill the cache as well, I guess. I don't know.
As well, not just the cache. They also have to kill the link. They have to hide the link.
Right.
Yeah.
But if the content's gone, what does the link matter?
Of course, yes. But usually the issue is that the content is more difficult to get to.
What about the Internet Archive? Which I think is a really valuable, important thing, the Wayback Machine, is saving the internet. Nobody's saving the internet. It's disappearing.
Absolutely. Leo, I completely agree. But I will answer to you what I basically would like to formulate to Christina about the concerns that he was voicing, which is it's not, you're always going to have issues in any system, in any rule, in any law. You can point out instances where it doesn't work or where it breaks something. But having a few exceptions where it doesn't work out well doesn't mean that you shouldn't do something about a problem.
I agree. Without a doubt, I agree. And to be clear, although I actually have a lot of issues, especially from a First Amendment perspective with the right to be forgotten, I have serious issues about that. I don't have a problem with GDPR, and I think that these are things that I'm with.
They're very different.
Absolutely, and I think these are things that, frankly, most of these big companies should have been doing already, and should have that they were actively avoiding. And I think that the fact that we've had 2 years and there was all this pushback is proof. Facebook kind of being publicly forced through, the terrible press it was getting to not have two option screens, but one is kind of proof of that. I agree with you. I'm just saying, like, not to say not to do it. Obviously, you still do it, but I do have questions that other than some of the biggest, like American-run conglomerates, that you might still have some very big services that will just not respond to this, and I think that that's just something that people should reconcile.
So sure. So the thing is, if one of those big companies, let's say, a Chinese company for the sake of argument, if they do business in Europe, if they are big enough or serious enough, at this point, they still do have to have some kind of presence in the country. Usually you need to have a company that is created in Europe to do business with European customers. You might have employees. You have someone who's responsible. So if they're big enough, the likeliness is that if there's a big problem, there is someone you can point to, go after, a company you can find, stuff like that. Yes, there might be a few instances where this doesn't happen, but
actually, that's an interesting. Christine raises an interesting question, though. What if you say, no, I'm not going to pay the fine? What do they do? Are they going to block you on the internet?
No, if you have a French, this is the reason why.
What are they going to do, though? Close your office? What are they going to do?
Yes, absolutely. If you don't pay the fine, then you're liable to criminal. I'm guessing. I'm not a lawyer.
So let's say it's not going to happen, but let's say they went after me and said, you're not erasing IP addresses of people who download your content.
Well, again,
and then I said, well, screw you. What are they going to do?
This is not. You don't have a company in France. Google does. Facebook does.
But everybody who has viewers or listeners or readers or customers in France are still liable to the EU for those customers, right?
Yes. Yes. And in theory, they could go after you. In theory, yes, Leo.
Yeah, I know. I'm too small. They're not going to, obviously. And
exactly.
But yeah, I mean, Google's going to pay, or at least they've appealed it, but Google's being fined, what was it, $1.7 billion or something. They'll eventually pay that.
I mean, or they'll get it knocked down. Well, because this is my question. This is what I'm saying. Speaking of Google specifically, they've been fined multiple times by the EU. To my knowledge, they've paid much smaller fines than what's been issued to them before.
$2.7 billion is the current one. That's
but there was a Google Shopping thing that I think this might be a separate one. That's the shopping one. Yeah. Okay, there was another one too that they put off. I mean, they've been putting this off for years. So part of me does kind of wonder, like, when are they actually going? I mean, I'm not opposed to this law at all. As I said, I agree with it. Part of me, though, does wonder, like, how much of this is bluster and how much of this is just going to carry on in the courts ad nauseum.
Listen, how many emails have you gotten of big companies implementing?
They're taking it seriously, right? As they should, because it's the right thing to do.
Well, I agree. Yeah. Look, when I first joined Microsoft, I joined Microsoft a year ago. They were already deep in the GDPR rollout plan. Like, it was already deeply underway. And I'm sure that that's the same way that it's been at every other major company. This is not something that 2 months ago people were like, oh, we've got to get on this. This has been probably in the works for 2 years at most of these places. I agree. I'm just saying, if people find that there isn't enough being done, or if Google or another company were to do something that people claimed violated this, I have no doubt in my mind that there would be an appeal for any sort of fine. And actually, I mean, I think this is a good thing. I'm just pointing out, I think that sometimes we say, oh, it's fixed now, and that's not necessarily going to be the case, because companies will look for ways to still capture what they can. I do have a question because I'm not clear on this. Well, if you ask users to opt into your agreement that says, I will willingly give you this information, can you bypass some of those restrictions? If you are able to get them to agree to a different user agreement that says, it's fine, you can capture my information.
Well, I think that's the point. I think you have to explicitly have them agree to giving you this information instead of implicitly doing that.
And you have to give them the right to delete it. They can come to you and say, delete my information.
And that is the other point I wanted to make. We can argue about whether or not they would comply or not. The fact is they are complying. You now have the ability to delete all of your information from all of these networks. Of course, most people are choosing not to do that and are probably going to keep choosing not to do that. But if you want to talk about how much teeth that law has and how much weight the EU, ultimately it's all about money. All of these companies are making a lot of money in the EU, and they're willing to invest a little bit of money in modifying their systems. First of all, because it's ultimately the right thing to do. I think a lot of them are saying now, well, maybe we should be a little bit regulated if it's the right way. And second of all, it's a small investment compared to the money they're making in the territory. And yes, they could close down their offices in the EU and have everyone go through Amazon.com or whatever US site it is. But in practice, that's just not the way it works. If you want to do business, even in the age of the internet, you need to have a presence in the country, or at least in the EU. So it's currently working. Now, of course, if they end up having a fine of 20 million euros or however much it might be, 4%, they will fight it. It will take years. But that's not even the point. The point is the deterring effect is working because they're already doing it.
You sent me a note this week, and I think we all read it. There's a couple of posts on Medium about detoxing.
Yes, from our data apocalypse that is always seems just upon us. But I did a personal process that I went through courtesy of these artists and activists out of Germany called Tactical Tech that lets you kind of review your own exposure to data. And so I did a personal journey and took notes and chronicled it. And out of that experience, which I've been processing for over a year, honestly, I wrote a humbly titled New Tech Manifesto on ways I think that we could collectively not just be afraid of what the present is, but like write a better future. My hope is that we don't feel disarmed by all of this or too depressed by it, but that we actually feel inspired. We're still early days of the internet and this whole networked world, and it doesn't have to be an advertising hellscape where we are all in someone's dossier of us. So I encourage folks to check that out, Baratunde.com.
I think the timing is good. I feel like we're making progress in that regard, aren't we? Thanks to GDPR and the Facebook debacle. We were watching the Facebook. So on the NBA playoffs, there were 3, not 1, not 2, but 3 apology commercials.
Yes.
Facebook, which has been running for several months. And I loved Facebook's because it said, all the things you love about Facebook, and then something happened, as if they had nothing to do with it.
It was like passive event that occurred. Yeah. They were the victims here.
Then something happened. Fake news happened.
Poor Zuckerberg, really. We should all just
privacy
sympathy for him.
People lost their data. It just happened. And it was pretty funny. And then there's Wells Fargo. They took a little more, I think a little more.
The Wells Fargo ad was the most annoying ad to listen to, but it was the most honest, I think, in admitting their own flaws. They said, we lost your trust. Accurate.
I wish Facebook had said,
own
it. That's the only kind of apology that works.
Yeah. One of the things, my favorite line from my little short series was, Facebook has been not just on an apology tour, but like a corrective blogging exercise where if you go to newsroom.fb.com, which I encourage everyone to do because we probably haven't, they are launching all these new tools. And they're saying we're going to audit the app developers and we're gonna get them. We're gonna get them for abusing your data. And it's like, dudes, it was like you opened the door. You left the keys in the lock. You had signs up that said, grab all this data while you can. Everything must go. So, Facebook, auditing and investigating app developers is like Walter White investigating Jesse for all that meth Jesse made in Walter's lab using his scientific knowledge. And until they not only apologize, but like really come clean and acknowledge that it was part of their corporate growth strategy to let all these folks in and sell us all out, it's going to be very hard to take them seriously when they ask for our trust back. I can't even trust you to be honest about the problem you helped create.
But that would require a little bit of humility on the side of Facebook, right. And I don't think that corporation has humility built into its DNA.
I think it goes right back to the business model. I mean, Zuckerberg has been playing fast and loose with his users' data since he was in short pants in Harvard, and he keeps apologizing, and it's always the same thing. It's just he's dependent on his business is dependent on the users sticking around, watching ads, and whatever if you're going to prioritize user engagement, then you're going to have things like the 2016 election. Did you see the thing that they did on the Daily Show, the Facebook skit?
No.
What if Facebook were a bar? Do you have that? Do you have that video?
I can play it. What if Facebook? Is this recently or?
Yeah.
Bartender used to work for the Daily Show, right?
I did.
Yeah.
Was that during the Jon Stewart era or the Trevor Noah era?
It was the first of the Trevor Noah era.
You did a really good job, man.
Here's Trevor and.
Go to 220 in the.
Yes. We'll go. This is a longer piece about Facebook. We'll go into the video.
If Facebook was a real physical place.
Hey, want to see a pic of my kid?
Nope. I'm heading out.
Don't want to stay for another drink?
Sorry, but this place kind of blows. I procrastinated long enough. I gotta get back to work.
She's got a Hillary Clinton button on her purse.
Check it. Before you go, this guy says Bernie would have won.
Oh, boy.
Seriously?
Them's fighting words.
Right. Here's what I hate about Bernie Bros.
You want another drink?
Yeah. Bernie is a socialist. The idea that a Rust Belt voter would ever...
What do you know about Rust Belt voters? We're the real America. Bartender, another pitcher, please. We're going to be here a while.
Oh. Bartender has a little face.
Climate change is real. Did you even see Leonardo DiCaprio's documentary series?
Want to see a pic of my kid?
I'm tired of Hollywood idiots
Nope.
telling us what to do. They should stick to acting.
They should stick to not sexually harassing. Hashtag Me Too. Hashtag Time's Up. Hashtag Boycott Hollywood.
Hey, take a joke, Snowflake. LOL.
Hey, I know it's problematic for me to say this as a straight white cis male, but check your privilege and show this beautiful goddess some respect.
Oh boy!
She just threw her drink in his face.
You need to do something about the misogyny in here.
Absolutely. And we're doing everything we can to block people like that from coming in here. And if we can't do that, we don't deserve to serve you. Speaking of, may I serve you?
Hell yeah, you can.
And another drink.
Sweden, they don't even have a word for poverty.
F Tupac. I like Lil Yachty.
You seem so trustworthy.
This is fairly
I feel
accurate.
like I can tell you anything.
Why would this not happen in real life?
I love that accent.
Because they wouldn't talk to you.
Cambridge Analytica hat.
Yeah, he has a Cambridge Analytica hat.
No, blue lives matter. And
All lives matter. You both wrong.
I think you mean you are both wrong.
Hey, can I see a pic
boy.
of my kid?
Aww.
She hauls off and slugs her. And he's just collecting money, more beer, more drinks.
the earth is
The bar is jammed.
I'm getting worse.
And everybody's fighting. Guys with Russian hats.
I'd like to pick up my kid right goddamn now.
Stop it! Look at what this place is doing to you. It's toxic.
Yeah, you're right. Should we leave?
So I apologize for people listening, but I think you can imagine what the video
Yeah, but
shows.
there's pretty accurate audio rendition of Facebook
Yeah,
as well.
yeah. So the thing about real life is there's a natural damper on that kind of stuff, right? You don't want to confront somebody directly. So there are people, occasionally you'll be in a bar that you'll meet somebody like that, but they're shut down fairly quickly, right?
Right, and the bartender tries to keep things calm rather
instead of lighting a fire.
Right.
Now, I feel like Twitter's even worse. I just want to say, Facebook's getting a lot of heat, but really, if you want to go into a bar fight, just say anything on Twitter.
Yeah, but the argument about Facebook's data usage is pretty separate from the toxicity of the platform itself. So they're similar points, but they are distinct, I think.
And the idea that Facebook knows all these things about us and has been making money the whole time off of that deep knowledge, that is, to Alex's point, more specific to Facebook than Twitter, which is a uncontrolled space, but not as deeply ingrained in our psyche as Facebook.
Yeah.
Brianna, you probably didn't have the luxury to go to E3 this year, so you followed it from afar.
I sure wish. Wow.
Yeah.
That would have been great.
Yeah. But Jeff, you were there.
I was. Yes, indeed.
Great fun. Why you agree with Brianna? It was the best yet. A really good E3.
I don't know if I would say best yet. I think it was a solid year. It's an interesting. We're in a sort of weird transition state for E3 because many of the big publishers are pulling out or having satellite shows that are concurrent with E3 but not actually part of E3, and so the big crazy floor chaos that used to be what defined E3 has subsided a bit, and the floor itself is still cacophonous and intense and has a lot of companies, but fewer than it used to. I mean, EA does its own event now in Hollywood instead of downtown Los Angeles. Microsoft this year pulled out and had an event that was adjacent at their.
Isn't that funny?
Microsoft
I
Theater.
thought they were at E3 because they had the press conference, just like always.
Yeah. Well, the Microsoft sponsors the theater at LA Live now, so it is adjacent to the convention center, but it wasn't actually part of E3, and their floor presence on the show floor of E3 was non-existent because they had their own location now. Yeah. So it's interesting. It's in a really interesting state. And of course, Nintendo for years has done what they call Nintendo Direct, which is not an actual press conference. There are no human beings in an auditorium listening to someone on a stage. They have a pre-recorded, edited, composed presentation that they just live stream whenever they feel like it. And they do that at E3, but they do it multiple times during the year. And I think you're going to see many companies moving away from E3 and moving to that model because they have control over the message. They don't have to deal with pesky human beings, and they're able to cut out the middleman. And why, as you keep saying on this show many times, I've heard disintermediate. There's no reason to have press between you and your message anymore.
That's what's killed, or not killed, but certainly caused problems for trade shows in general. I mean, Microsoft pulled out at CES. Comdex has disappeared. Apple showed the way. Apple doesn't go to these events. You just have your own events, and you get more attention. You're not competing with anybody else. Somehow, though, it seems like Microsoft, Sony, and Nintendo still feel like they have to be somewhere around E3. That's still the week, right?
It's still the week.
It's the week that all the news is coming out, right?
Like,
and from a gamer's perspective, you don't really care if Nintendo is announcing Smash like as part of E3 or like with the Nintendo Direct. I just care the new Smash is coming out. So I really hear what you're saying, Jeff, but like they've struggled with this for years. Leo, you were saying this was the first E3 that was open to the press. If I'm remembering this correctly, they tried that a few years ago. Like letting people in, then they shut it off to journalists again and let people back in, if I'm remembering that correctly. I just think ultimately it matters like what games were announced and what games are coming out, because they're all kind of competing for that mind share. Like, is Fallout 77 going to be the big game that people care about? Is Anthem? And I think what we saw this year were some fresh new IPs really getting a lot of attention from people.
Yeah. I think, according to GameSpot, E3 opens to the public for the first time ever. 15,000 tickets. Wait a minute. That was last year. Okay, there you go. So it is the second year in a row. Okay.
Second year, and they had, this year was the first time they had different hours for the public and the press, which was kind of nice. We got a couple of hours at the beginning to go in and just have press only. But I agree with you, Brianna. I think you're right. I think it ultimately comes down to what games were shown, what things were talked about. Because it is the biggest week in the gaming calendar, and that's really the most important thing. It is interesting how the show is changing, and I think kind of receding in a certain sense. But from a gaming standpoint, from just what was announced, it really was a strong year for some exciting stuff. We did get a lot of sequels, as we always do, but some exciting new stuff, some interesting trends. Go ahead.
You know, and just I too am a gamer, although I suck at games. It's a huge part. It is explicitly my hobby. Like, I'm not working if I'm playing games. And it's been fascinating to watch games both pioneer some of the spaces that we've talked about, specifically social hooks. I mean, and social mechanics, they figured out long before social media. Cybersecurity and cyber defense the game industry had to pioneer these things. And they're now kind of following the SaaS model. And it's interesting to see the games industry take a page out of the services book and really transition. Almost every major publisher has transitioned from releasing standalone products and single player products over the last decade to these always on service models. And whether gamers I know are very vocal with their opinions, especially on Reddit. But whether you love this or hate this, it really has represented this kind of massive sea change that's happened in a multi-billion-dollar industry that the mainstream media has kind of turned a blind eye to.
One of the things you'll see from time to time on TWiT is you'll see a little Reddit emerge into TWiT. It turns out Karsten Bondi, our producer, and I are both massive Reddit fans. I think Karsten found this one. Now, is this a spoiler? Should we do a spoiler alert? If you've still not seen, I can't believe anybody's not seen, what is it called? Infinity War? Infinity War. If you've not seen Infinity War, well, shame on you. Just buy it for Christmas, watch it, then watch this great take on Infinity War from Reddit. If you were a fan of Infinity War, you might be in the subreddit. Reddit.com
We've all signed up for it ever since
/r/Thanos did nothing wrong. Josh Brolin, aka Thanos, has a message for you.
Here we go, Reddit users.
Tomorrow. By the way, notice Josh Brolin, half of his clothes went away. When he snapped his fingers.
Let's face it, if you've got a chest like that, I'd be walking around topless most of the time as well. You know,
tomorrow, July 9th, at 9, actually, we don't know what time, sometime during the day, exactly one half of all of the subscribers to the Thanos has a message for you, I'm sorry, to the Thanos did nothing wrong subreddit will be banned. So everybody needs to sign up. I noticed that the number has gone up a lot since this article in, was it CNET? 557,000 subscribers now. It's more than doubled. And we're going to do more to get that increased.
Yeah.
It's going up
Probably
fast.
doubled again since it was on this show. Or
Yeah, because everybody
the next
wants
48 hours.
to be banned by Thanos. So we'll get back to you next time and tell you how that went. I joined immediately. You have to not only subscribe. Karsten, who somehow knows all this, says you also have to say something. And Karsten told me that what I should say is, I don't feel so good, right? Is that the canonical Thanos?
That is a good thing to say in these situations.
I don't. You guys don't watch sport ball. I don't get the comic book movies. It's just...
No, I mean, it's... The whole Marvel things were sort of, I mean, okay, they were fun for a while, and occasionally they're quite good, but mainly it's kind of brain candy. You know, you go in.
Ant-Man was really good.
Yeah, I hear that's funny.
Well,
I developed a
fun.
very weird pathology during the big battle scenes. Now, they're so overwhelming. It started with Black Panther. It happened in Infinity War during those massive, chaotic battle scenes. I fall asleep.
Yeah.
And then
I don't love that stuff either.
It's not like, oh, I'm bored. I literally just fall asleep and then wake up when they're over.
So,
and I said, who won?
I podcast on The Incomparable with Jason
Yes.
Snell
Oh, nice.
and that crew. And we're doing a Marvel summer where we rewatch and analyze the movies. And I'm on next week for Avengers 1, Avengers 2, and Captain America Civil War. And it's been really interesting.
Can we do a DC summer next year?
If they make decent movies, sure.
And then
Don't hold your breath, but no.
All right, that's it.
Did you see the Twitter thread sort of deconstructing the votes website? They're the blockchain voting system.
No. Let me see if I can find it. Who's it?
Kevin Beaumont.
Okay.
So so he looks at the website. He's like out of date SSH, Apache, PHP.
Oh, I remember this.
POP3, Plesk, and then he just keeps going through.
Plesk, please, really,
yeah,
Plesk.
At some point, Votes comes in and is like, "No, you don't understand." And then he's like, "Oh, don't understand where you left your source code on GitHub with hard-coded usernames and passwords." And it's a pretty bad cell phone. So.
Lots of good, actually, information. Here's Rachel Toback at the DEF CON hacking conference, learning how to gain getting admin access to a voting machine. Requires no tools, takes under 2 minutes.
What?
It's used in 18 states, this system.
What? You just press a button and it opens?
Yeah, wait a minute. Let me just show you this. You can turn on my audio.
Yeah.
This is
The
Rachel.
voting machine is used in 18 different states, and it's extremely easy to get admin access on this machine. So let me show you how quick it is. It's about a little under 2 minutes.
So, by the way, this is the voting machine in the booth.
All I have to do, this bad actor, would be to open up this machine by pressing this button right here. When it's off, removing the card reader, removing this, you don't need any tools to do this. Unplugging this, again, you don't need any tools to do this.
Oh, wow.
There goes the hard drive.
Turning it on, all you have to do is pick this lock here with a ballpoint pen.
What?
Press the red button. And we're gonna let it boot up here. And then I'll show you the admin access.
This is Premier Voting Systems, used in 18 states, kids.
Wow.
18 states.
This is not okay.
Yeah, Rachel is great. We actually interviewed her about social engineering. She's
yes.
a very, very talented hacker.
So it's loading what they call a secure
Looks like Windows CE.
terminal right now.
Did you see that?
The problem is a lot of this stuff came up, following the 2000 election.
This is copyright 2003 to 2008.
Yeah.
The software running on
there was a big push to update voting systems to get rid of hanging chads
Here
and
we're
all
going to
that.
see a couple of error messages,
we ended up
and all
with
you have to do to
this crap.
bypass those error messages is just click cancel and OK. And now I have
You got root.
full admin access under 2 minutes.
All she had to do was really pull the hard drive and boot up to the firmware.
Yeah, that's all she did.
Does this make does anybody want to now start a voting booth company that would have
cameras in it,
audited,
let me ask,
code that's open source?
Why should voting be proprietary? Voting systems. Why should it be proprietary? Why is it not open source?
By the way, one of the few strengths we have in all this is that every county uses a different system. So it's a little harder to hack.
At least you don't have a monoculture.
Yeah, there's not a monoculture. But you're right. This should be open source for one thing. We got to look at companies like Diebold that don't really seem to care. It's depressing. Anyway, it's going on right now at DEF CON. I'm sure there'll be more like that, Rachel.
Look what else can be hacked.
Everything can be hacked, man.
It's true.
Everything. We'll be back with our best of in just a second. The stock market's crazy, isn't it? It's going up and down. Betterment is the smart way to manage your money. It's the largest independent online financial advisor. They're designed to help you build wealth, but also plan for retirement, save for college, achieve all your financial goals. Look, you don't want to put it in a savings account that's earning less than the inflation rate. You need to invest. Betterment's the better way. Their technology is designed to help you make more from your investments with tax-efficient investing strategies. It'll give you an edge. And Betterment, by the way, this is a good time to be in Betterment. When the market goes down, Betterment will help you save more of your money by taking advantage of things like tax loss harvesting. Betterment provides unlimited expert advice designed to help you make smart financial decisions. You're still in control, but Betterment can help you. And this, I can't underscore this enough. They're what they call a fiduciary. That means everything they recommend is based on your best interest. They are not incentivized to recommend certain funds. They don't have their own investment products to sell. They are working for you, and you can't say that about most financial advisors. This is what you want. Somebody who's going to give you real good, clear advice that's for your benefit. Betterment gives you constant access to information and tools that let you track progress towards your goals so you can always feel like a smart, savvy investor. Now, look, nobody's going to say investment doesn't involve risk, but do it right. Do it the right way. Do it the better way with Betterment. You can get up to 1 year managed free. By the way, I should emphasize this. Betterment's fee structure is flat fee. So no matter how many trades, they don't charge you per trade. It's a very small, very affordable, flat fee based on the amount of money you have invested. And you can look it up on the site because it varies depending on what you're doing. But how about getting no fees for 1 year, managed free? For more information, go to betterment.com/twit. Betterment.com/twit. Betterment. Outsmart average. And now back to the show.
In the spirit of being healthy and in the spirit of Elon Musk's latest views on how we should do these sort of things.
Oh no.
Who's up for a spliff? Right.
Oh my gosh.
No, I'm kidding. This is a family show. There is nothing in there other than pure legal tobacco, which will only kill you if you use it as per the manufacturer's instructions. But what was Elon thinking? I mean, seriously.
So are we familiar with the Joe Rogan show as a group in general?
Yes.
Have we've seen this
Yes.
before? Okay,
Mhm.
so
Yes.
for people who don't know the Joe Rogan show, it's one dude who's in the MMA scene, Joe Rogan, who's also a quasi-comedian, who does
MMA is mixed martial arts. That's basically
from
two
News Radio
people.
back in the 1990s when he was basically just the bohunk that was brought on to be the muscular engineer type. And it sort of amazes me that he swerved into this
niche.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, he's mastered it, so kudos to him.
But his show has great reach. Like James Hetfield from Metallica went on after the latest album. Every celebrity you've known's dropped by, and it's a long-form interview.
Yeah.
Now, what would happen if you took that format and put a kind of really under-stressed tech executive with a history for drug use and crazy sayings? Well, what you can imagine happened. So...
Yeah, but I mean, 9% off the share price of the company initially. It bounced back slightly. The U.S. military is now looking into this because as a federal contractor, he's not supposed to have anything to do with drugs. I mean, Dwight, at the end of the day, was this mental breakdown? Was this just publicity seeking?
Well, if you watch the whole video, I don't think Elon necessarily was expecting it, but haven't there been tweets between his girlfriend and another musician about him getting stoned all the time? I seem to remember a story about that a couple of weeks.
When he was joking about taking the company private.
Yes, right, exactly. And so I think he's 420 friendly anyway, and he's not the guy actually working turning wrenches on the rocket. So I'm not sure exactly how that extends up. One of the things that's really fascinated me about the legalization of pot around the country is you have places where it's now legal, but you have businesses who will fire you if you do it. And this kind of dovetails into that a little bit because, what are Tesla's and SpaceX's rules about doing marijuana, even on your own time and certainly in public?
Yeah, there was a report of a woman who was fired from Tesla because she tested positive for marijuana, cannabis, and she was mad because Elon was out there smoking weed. Now, I don't have a problem with what you do in your own time, for sure, but I do think that it was a failure of crisis communications, too, in the middle of the struggles that Tesla has had in the last 12, 18, 24 months, to go through this level of distraction and stupidity into the mix.
Yeah.
Well, I guess the question is, the question I have is, how does Musk understand his relationship with his shareholders and his board of directors? Because it's one thing when it's your company and there are not people who have put their money into it and are relying on you to make the kind of decisions that will increase market valuation. But when you become a public company, you are essentially making a contract with shareholders that says, when I act as a representative of this company in the public space, everything I do in the interest of increasing value. And I don't know.
This doesn't increase value, does it?
He hasn't demonstrated. He hasn't demonstrated an awareness of that. He hasn't demonstrated an understanding that once your company is publicly traded, your relationship to both your intellectual property and your corporation is much different than when you own the whole thing the whole way down.
Well, also, he spends so much time complaining about short sellers going after his stock, and then to give them such blatant ammunition seems, quite frankly, a little bit bizarre. But
self-defeating, even. But this is the story of Elon in the last couple of years. I mean, he's done through his firms a lot of really great stuff. I still watch SpaceX launches because I'm a huge nerd.
No, me too. He's revolutionized that area.
The live video is fantastic. And the Model 3 launch has finally revved up. They're claiming to hit profitability this year. If he just said nothing, a lot of stuff would have gone away. Instead, Joe Rogan a large blunt, and 1,000 million memes that were born from that moment. I mean, just unnecessary, and he needs better friends to tell him not to do this stuff.
Well, I also wonder if there's the fallacy of intelligence where the idea is if you're really smart in one area, you're smart in all areas.
The Germans do have a word for this. It means someone who is highly skilled in one area or a complete fool in others.
I'm going to Google what that is.
Yeah,
please do.
It's definitely in there.
Because I wouldn't contest his innovation or his genius in a lot of ways. And in that interview, one of the things I really liked was how he nerded out over alternative energy sources.
Oh, yeah.
And the idea of breaking free of the fossil fuel economy. I mean, good for him for getting those ideas out to an audience that is not typically hearing those ideas. Like, good for him for that. And good for him for being smart about this stuff. But is he smart about how to be a CEO of a public-facing, publicly traded company?
Well, in that same interview, he also reiterated the idea that maybe we're all just living in a simulation. That came up again, and that was after the toke, I believe.
There's a philosophical term for that too, where and I forget what that is. I read about it recently, where somebody like did an entire philosophical syllogism who's like, "This is the only logical conclusion." I was like, "Really?"
Yeah, that's what Elon believes, and that can't be good for his shareholders either. He doesn't want shareholders. I mean, that's clear. He said he wanted to
really
take
like
private,
mess with him at a meeting and just have like a bunch of Mr. Smiths come in and sit down, like a bunch of Hugo Weavings look-alike sitting in the audience, all just completely unamused. And simulation, this Elon.
Okay. I know that
simulation comes for you in this case, I guess.
Exactly.
But he just needs to be reined in. I'm sorry, like flat out. I know he's rich. I know he's interesting, but you got to be a better manager than that. And you're screwing up your employees' net worth, not just yours. It's not just about you. And the same way that politics feels all Trump right now, all car feels Elon. But there's thousands of people that work there that have 401ks and have, I'm sure, RSUs.
Who are invested in this and they don't want to see it.
They just want to send their kids to college.
This is the conundrum of being a CEO is if you're doing it right, a lot of your time is actually spent looking at really big picture stuff and understanding the effects that you have on dozens of people, dozens of constituencies, each with their own priorities. And as a public-facing CEO, he doesn't demonstrate an understanding or knowledge of that.
He has the EQ of a 6-year-old.
I was not here for this, so I did not see this, but I'm so glad we have resurrected it. This was when I was on vacation. Doctor decided he had something to say about the new iPhones, and he did it in an interesting way.
The size aspect is, I think, a good thing because here's my iPhone 8, and then here's the guys here 3D printed the new iPhone here, and you can see it's pretty much the same form factor, at least of my 8.
But which one are you referring to? Is that the R?
This is the S10s. Do you see how hard I'm working? There's smoke coming out of my ears as I'm trying to remember this.
These are the worst names. These are the worst names since 2 months ago or a month ago when the Note 9 came out with lavender purple and ocean blue. I'm like, ain't they the same thing? If you just said lavender, wouldn't I know that that's purple? If you said ocean, wouldn't I know that's blue? How you just redundancy with the names? And then Apple comes along and says, hold my beer. And then they come out with all this stuff. And to you saying that all the phones are the best phones now, no, they're not. No, they're not. That are, okay. Can we at the feature part yet? So I can
Let's do it. I want to hear this. He was going.
Let me tell you something. Dual SIM cards. Welcome to 2012. Oh, we got dual SIM cards. You know you can do that, right? You got an eSIM card. Other people that had that? Cool. Okay, next thing. Stereo recording. What? They had that on other phones too? Oh my God, but ours is magical stereo recording because we have waves in the video. It's amazing. Wait, what's another feature that we have? We have HDR picture technology, nanobyte, gigabyte, thermal timeout learning. What? Pixel had that in their camera last year with the, okay. So what do we have new again? What do we do? What do we innovate? I don't know. And then you go talk about the battery life. What cell phone have you ever seen in your life that doesn't just tell you 13 hours with an asterisk, 14 hours or asterisk? Apple came along and said 30 minutes more than the old phone you used to buy. 20 minutes more than that little phone you used to have, and maybe 15 minutes more than this new phone you're going to get if you get the big one. Just tell me how long the battery lasts, because you won't tell me what's in there for the battery. And then the 1 meter versus the 2 meter. You couldn't have just made that all the same depth. Really? I still got you. Just The 2.4 cents it would have cost you because you told me I still got the same chip in it and I'm not supposed to be jealous. Then you come with this wackadoodle screen. You charge $749. This phone should be $599. They want this phone for everybody and every kid. There's so much better phones out there for that price range that you could get in the world, and they say, oh, $749 for everybody. For who? Entitled children are gonna bug their kids so they can do this emoji thing? That's all it's for. You're just trying to get money. Apple ain't innovated nothing. All they do, I'm sorry, I'm yelling. I'm so upset. All they do is raise the price of their phones, and they make more money on the margins. So when I spend $1,100 on a Max and I only get 64 gigs, and I look at a Note, and it starts at 128 gigs because, they live in America and the world as we live in, and they know that nobody wants the 64 gigs. Then they offer you a phone at $512 for $2,500, and then you could put another $512 on top of that. I could get a terabyte of space with a Note. You know how many videos of cats and dogs and my child I can do with a terabyte on my phone? I can record my life for a month straight with a terabyte. But Apple is just squeaking on by with a 64, then to a 256. I hate so much the things that they do. Now ask me if I'm buying it and which one I'm buying.
17 anonymous sources in government, 3-letter agencies, Amazon and Apple, said that Chinese spies had placed a tiny rice-sized microchip on Supermicro motherboards in 2015. These Supermicro motherboards were used in many, many places, servers by Apple, the Department of Defense. We even had one because this all came to light. According to, now I'm going to say this a couple of times in this story because I want to emphasize, according to Bloomberg Business Week, we even had one because it was first discovered by Amazon when they were doing their due diligence. They were about to acquire a company called Elemental Technologies. Elemental makes a streaming box, a box we've used for some years, a very expensive box that takes our video, compresses it, and then feeds it out to Ustream, YouTube, Twitch, Mixer, whoever it is that's restreaming our stuff. These Elemental motherboards, Amazon, during a routine security audit before the acquisition, found this little chip. According to Bloomberg Business Week, the chip was posing as a minor support chip on the motherboard. Nobody would pay any attention to it. But when the motherboard was first booted in a server, would modify the operating system, phone home the Chinese military, and help the Chinese military hack these servers in the Pentagon. Elemental's widely used. As I said, we use it. I presume if this is true, our motherboards were hacked. But then the story gets weirder. So 17 sources, anonymous sources, Bloomberg Business Week, highly credible source. The next day, Amazon, Apple, even the freaking Chinese government unequivocally deny it. They say it never happened. Apple said the story was wrong and misinformed. The Department of Homeland Security yesterday, well, actually, their denial was a little less unequivocal. They said, we have no reason to doubt. We have no reason to doubt that Apple and Amazon are telling the truth. That's not exactly like, no, it never happened. That's like, well, we have no reason now. In this particular circumstance, we currently have no reason to doubt. Nevertheless, the denials from Amazon and Apple were really strong. No, it didn't happen. Bloomberg's completely wrong. How does this happen? Is this Actually, I'm going to poll you. We'll start with you, Rich. Who's right?
Oh, man. I feel like this is kind of the biggest fear of kind of the tech world, right? Like all this stuff is made over in China. This is kind of the perfect way of infiltrating the systems with a tiny chip that nobody recognizes or even cares to notice. And they can take control of these things. They can modify the system on startup, whatever they want to do. So it's tough for me to believe that Business Week has this many people saying this happened and it hasn't happened. And I understand why these big companies, including Amazon and Apple, are strongly denying this because it's pretty bad for them if this happened to them. So I sort of believe it. And I think that just reading the story, I mean, it's fascinating. I mean, I couldn't put this thing down.
Oh, yeah.
You know, it was like so well written and so like I just wanted to know more and more and more. But I think what was missing in this story to me is kind of the consequence, like concrete, like what they did with these little chips. And maybe I missed that, but I didn't see like, you know, did they take down something? Did they, you know, or is this all just like kind of laying in wait for something that they want to do in the future? That was kind of the part that I was confused upon.
It's a great question. Ant, who do you believe?
Initially, my gut is actually siding with Apple, just because of their history regarding security and privacy.
And why would they lie, right? What I mean, that would be a big deal for Apple PR to issue, and they issued 2 statements.
Yeah.
All right. They come forth pretty quickly about it, and then I just think back to other scenarios in the past with Apple, as far as like when we had that shooting at that school in California, and they wanted to search the phones, and Apple was trying to do the right thing from a privacy and security standpoint. So my gut just says I'm going to go with Apple. Now, had it just been Amazon saying, no, that's not true, I'd have had the hairy eyeball.
You don't trust it. Apple said specifically, quote, on this, I mean, this is as strong as you can get, we can be very clear. Apple has never found malicious chips, hardware manipulations, or vulnerabilities purposely planted in any server. Daniel Rubino, what do you think? You've been covering this for a long time. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm leaning towards there's got to be some truth to this. Now, what we may not know are the exact details. Actually, we don't know the exact details. And there could be some crossed wires here on information. Maybe some hardware was shipped to Apple, but it was caught in time and never deployed it, in which case both things could be true. But yeah, right. You know, there's been a lot of reports around Huawei and other companies too, right, about this possibility, this threat. And it works both ways. You know, there's concerns too, the U.S. companies doing the same. I don't know. My hunch says that there's probably some truth to this. It's just a question of to what extent the damage was done. But none of this is surprising to anyone who's been covering this industry for the last couple of years, as this big concern over the strength of Chinese tech and its influence on the U.S. economy. Everybody knows that the way you wage war is changing from a pure, military exercise to more technological or information, in the case of what Russia's been doing or accused of been doing a lot recently. So just because the companies deny this stuff, if it's an issue of national security, they could be quite frankly told to don't talk about this because you don't want to expose those vulnerabilities. Maybe there's active investigations going on. We don't know all the details here, but I find it hard to believe with 17 sources that none of this is true. I think it's more about degrees at this point.
Zach Whitaker, who writes about security at TechCrunch and has worked most recently at CBS, he's been covering security forever. He says, welcome to the murky world of national security reporting. He says, even with this story, my gut is mixed. There is one potential scenario that maybe means both of these, that the companies aren't lying, but the story is true. I have to say, to add myself to this poll, there's no way Bloomberg Businessweek runs this story unless, and they stand behind it, by the way, unless they absolutely have unequivocal evidence of this. 17 sources, all anonymous, yeah, but you'd have to say Bloomberg Businessweek is making this up. That's too many people to not be true. So here's maybe a very narrow, maybe the Apple PR team that responded, and this was John Gruber's theory, didn't know about it, right? If something like this happens, you're not going to send out a memo to everybody in Apple saying, hey, by the way, look what we found. You're going to keep it very quiet. So maybe a handful of people at Apple will know, and the ones who don't know are the ones making the unequivocal denial. There's also a possibility there's a U.S. government gag order, although Apple, again, says we are in no way under a gag order. But again, maybe the people who are under the gag order are a handful of people, not the people writing the press release. That's the only way I could see both sides being accurate. And I don't think Apple PR is lying in such an outright. They would say nothing, or they would say little, or they would say There's lots of ways they could slice this without saying, no, it did not happen.
Yeah, it's odd that they came out so strong in their denial of this, like immediately, and emailed the media, including myself. And that rarely happens when they, usually the way Apple works is they kind of talk to the certain media that covers the beat that they want to get the story out with. This time they just sent out a blanket email through their legal guy denying it and kind of linking to this, which I found to be very heavy-handed. So it's like one of these things where you want to believe Apple, but at the same time, it seems like it's overly like what are they? I understand they have a lot to lose in this, but it just seems like they really want to make sure that like, no, we are not involved in this. This is not true at all. I wonder if their reporter is going to be invited to the next Apple event.
That's Apple's stick, baby.
Right. Probably not.
We won't be seeing you at the next Apple event. As somebody who hasn't been invited to an Apple event in years, I could say that stick isn't that weighty. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to say another angle to this, possibly is more the conspiratorial angle, is that this is really a story. The U.S. government has a vested interest in undermining Chinese tech, or at least eroding the trust in it for such circumstances. We obviously know about the Qualcomm-Broadcom attempted buyout and how that was blocked. And,
do you think Bloomberg got played by the U.S. intelligence community?
I mean, in a way, no. 17 seems like a lot. On the other hand, this is kind of what intelligence is supposed to be doing. And so I don't think we can discount it. I still think there's actually a threat from China in this sense. Why? Because why wouldn't they, right?
Right.
It's just that's how counterintelligence works. We do the same thing. So there may be some, like I said, there may be some truth to this, but it may have been played up by some people in the government too. Even this current administration is very much against, giving China too much leverage when it comes to manufacturing. And so I don't know. There's it's a hard story to follow and believe, especially when you're talking about espionage, counterintelligence, and national security.
Bloomberg writes, the company's denials are countered by 6 current and former senior national security officials who, in conversations that began during the Obama administration and continued under the Trump administration, detailed the discovery of the chips in the government's investigation. This has been going on for several years. And it sounds like Bloomberg reporters have been working on this story for several years. One of those officials and 2 people inside Amazon provided extensive information on how the attack played out at Elemental and Amazon. That's another thing. You would not only have to, it's one thing to say, well, you can easily get 17 CIA people to say, yeah, this happened. I mean, that's their job. But then you're getting people inside Amazon confirming it. The details match. The officials and one of the insiders also described Amazon's cooperation with the government investigation. In addition to the 3 Apple insiders, 4 of the 6 U.S. officials confirmed that Apple was a victim. 17 people confirmed the manipulation of Supermicro's hardware. The sources were granted anonymity because of the sensitive and in some cases classified nature of the information. Daniel, that's an interesting theory, though. I kind of, maybe this is, it's clear something's going on.
Yeah, I think that's the truth.
But we don't know what it is.
Information warfare. It's the new battle of the 21st century. Super dangerous, super hard to counter. It's who do you believe, who do you trust, and when you undermine all institutions around you, people can't even trust news sources anymore. So it's we're in a brave new world. It's not. I'm kind of nervous about it. When I did political science, undermining classic institutions is the first way you destabilize society. So
that's exactly right.
There's a real threat to it.
It's exactly right.
Well, and from the consumer standpoint, I mean, obviously this was kind of big server things, but for the average consumer, I think it makes you think twice too. With everything that you have in your house, I mean, we're all putting these smart speakers in our homes. Where are those manufactured? I mean, this is becoming a reality for the average person to think about the stuff that we're carrying with us and the stuff that we're putting in our homes, the routers, the systems, and this becomes like very clear that, oh my gosh, like this is something that of course we've thought of, but not into this detail. And you're just like, this is exactly how it's done,
right?
In a big way,
right?
IoT is huge security vulnerability right now. Microsoft's trying to counter with Azure Sphere, which has been in the headlines recently, as their first attempt at making these sort of systems more secure for everybody, anyone who's manufacturing devices. But right now it's Wild West. People are just putting microphones and internet into all these devices. We're putting them in our homes, and there's no regulation or checks. It's going to come back to bite us. I guarantee it will. It's just a matter of time.
Well, really, if
As
you
much
believe,
as I said,
go ahead, Ant.
As much as I said I trust, what Apple's response was, at the same time, I still have that little fear in the back of my head of the button that the Chinese could just push at any time, because of everything that I'm looking at right now was not made right here in the U.S., and they could easily just push a button to make things just go nuts on me and maybe cause some even bigger problems if they wanted to, because we don't know. I can crack this machine open and I don't know what all of these transistors and capacitors and all of that. I don't know what any of that stuff is doing. I just know it's my motherboard.
Well, I mean, you make an excellent point. Very few people understand the complexity of our modern world, and fewer still understand the security issues and could detect these problems. And if you have a determined adversary with nation state level resources behind them, even if it's just North Korea, it seems to me that it would be very, very difficult if you had somebody who wanted to do this to prevent it. Everything is made in China, or almost everything. So the supply chain is coming out of China. And even if you're buying a phone made in Korea or Taiwan or Thailand or India or Brazil, many of the parts are made in China. So I doubt there's one consumer electronic device in your house that it hasn't something that was manufactured in China.
I mean, I'm sitting here looking at junk on my desk. This is a power distribution board. Pretty sure this was not made in the USA.
Does it say Super Micro on it? Just look for that. Yeah. It's like the equivalent of the Intel Inside sticker. Can you imagine if Super Micro had one of those and now everyone just sees those? I'm going to go from the flip side, though, on the fact that China knows that all this stuff is big business. And I mean, clearly we love to believe in these conspiracy theories, and we love to imagine that it's like us versus them versus, Russia. I do think there, of course, are elements of that in our world. But at the same time, I want to believe that they know that the business that they're going to make off these components are way better than, the business they're going to make off of the whatever marketplace they're dealing with.
Absolutely.
With the shady stuff.
But what's going on in China, and it's true in other places too, is there's more than one constituency. So there are absolutely, I would say most of the Chinese government wants to maintain good relations because, after all, we're their biggest market. On the other hand, there are, and this hack, it's presumed came from the Chinese military. There are, I'm sure, hardliners in the Chinese military who say, yeah, let's just in case, let's be ready for cyber warfare. I don't think it's monolithic, in other words. And I completely agree with you, Daniel. This completely could be a conspiracy from the United States government who wants us to say exactly that.
Mm-hmm. It's crazy.
At this point, the only way America can hack the rest of the world is by putting something in a Frappuccino. Because
that's the only thing. The only thing we're exporting is Starbucks.
Wait, we got Facebook, though. Facebook, I hear, is not so secure these days.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
What a world. What a world we live in. But it was almost inevitable when the tools we use got so complex. Jerry Pournelle, I've mentioned this to Jerry before he passed, in his book Lucifer's Hammer. The story is that a giant asteroid hits the
great book.
Yeah, isn't it good? And there's just a few survivors in the world who kind of have to cobble together existence again. But he points out that we live in a world where we use stuff every day. We have no idea how it works, nor could we recreate it if we had to. And that's your car, that's your freaking microwave oven, let alone your computers and your phones.
I'm guilty.
We're all guilty. And I don't think there's any one person who could do this, who could recreate this. So that's kind of the consequence of that is there's a huge amount of trust in using all of this stuff. And if you had an actor who decided that he didn't care about being trusted or wanted to subvert this, It's a little, is it chilling or is it industrial espionage? I mean, so a lot of these servers are used by the Department of Defense. These elemental servers alone are used all over the place. The CIA, the NSA, they're used in drone placement. They're used controllers. They're used all over the place.
But here's the question. Has anyone cracked one of these open and found this little chip? I mean, wouldn't that be the first thing that one of these companies would do, is kind of look in there? I mean, I know it's only been a couple days since the story came out, but wouldn't that be part of this reporting?
I mean, I think that's what the original report actually did say, was that when Amazon was looking to buy Elemental, they sent their boards for review to a third-party company who found a little chip on there that was not part of the original diagram designed for that chipset, and that's what the red flag was. And then I think trying to figure out what it does or its potential was a matter of sort of reverse engineering it. But
well, I can bet that everybody who has a super micro motherboard and has the capability. The problem is who has the capability. There's a lot of little chips on there. Have you ever looked at a little motherboard?
Yeah.
And they're labeled. But I mean, I don't know how you would have to take the thing apart, test each one individually.
Right.
Non-trivial.
And who has those resources?
An Elemental costs $30,000. I am not taking my Elemental. I actually proposed this to our engineering team. I said, because we have a new Elemental from AWS, so that we just got a few months ago. So that will not, obviously. But we had the old Elemental from this time frame. We were using it back then. But unfortunately, we had to send it back. But
where's the iFixit teardown when you need it?
Yeah, I want to tear down. iFixit maybe could do that. Yeah. They specialize in identifying unlabeled or poorly labeled or incorrectly labeled chips. I think we can all agree that there's potential for this to happen, whether it actually did happen or not. And I think Bloomberg didn't get it wrong. I just don't understand what happened. What the response is and why the response is that. And I don't think Apple is so venal as to say, well, that will hurt our business. We better lie about it. I agree with you in that case, Ant. There's no way that's the case. I think it's much more that whoever issued this release didn't know, if anything. And nobody's talking. Maybe even Tim Cook doesn't know. I don't know. Photographers like Trey Ratcliffe made his name on Google Plus because it was such a good place for photographers. People like Mike Elgin really sang its praises. I loved it. But if I'm looking at my Google Plus page, it's filled with spam of a sexual nature in many cases. And I'm a member of a lot of, remember they pushed communities? So I joined a lot of geek communities, and now I'm getting porn spam. That's not a good look for Google Plus.
The one metric from the Project Strobe one was that I think that the average time spent on
Google
page.
Plus feed. Don't show it on TV.
Well,
but you see,
maybe
Mark,
you shouldn't have joined the geek porn community.
It's not a geek porn community. It's geeks. I guess I should unjoin it. That's part of the problem, right, Ron? If you don't moderate your community,
right,
the bad guys just totally
they get to it.
They get there. So I'm going to leave geeks. The Google Plus geek community apparently is not. Oh, man. What's this one? Photography. Oh, now I have to leave photography, too. They're all full of it.
The data point they said was the average time spent on page by Google Plus users was like 6 seconds.
They said, this was in the Project Strobe announcement. We found that 90% of Google Plus users left the page after 5 seconds.
Yeah.
Because they went, whoa, why my eyes?
Or they went to the page and posted that link and then went to the next one, right? Because they're just spamming it.
It's too bad because, honestly, it's a beautiful... Am I wrong? I think it's a beautiful social network. It has moderation tools better than Twitter, better than Facebook. I thought Google Plus should have won. Why did it not win?
Google fundamentally doesn't understand social. As a company, as a culture, they fundamentally don't understand social.
If you just give people a great tool, why don't they use it?
I don't think anybody building the product or steering it understands social. I just don't. And I think that you can have all the best things, but if you're not coming at it from that perspective, I mean, there was an interesting Medium post, or it wasn't a Medium, sorry, it was somebody's blog someone who's on the design team for the first 8 months who kind of talked about his experiences, and they're obviously colored in some ways that maybe aren't fair to the final product. But it was always from the very beginning, it was a defensive move, always. And that comes through. And I think that the fact that it was designed because Google realized that they'd missed social, and then the fact that it was pushed down everyone's throats so much to the point where there wasn't even a reason for people to want to use it. You were almost turned off. I mean, there was a point where it was linked to all of your Google stuff. Like, I'm verified on YouTube because of it, so I'm thankful for that. I had a ridiculous number of Google Plus followers. It was I would joke about it because it was hilarious. It still is. But I didn't really ever see that sort of engagement. It was just kind of this weird thing foisted upon people, and I don't think it ever had direction from people who saw it as anything other than we've got to try to beat Facebook because that's an important part of the future going forward. And it is what it is. It's a shame, but it is what it is.
It is a shame. By the way, if you want to learn Google Plus, the Brooklyn Public Library on Tuesday is having a class. It's never too late to learn Google Plus.
Oh God!
It will be in 10 months.
That's so good. That's my old library. I'm so, oh God. God bless
I want to go to, that's Tuesday.
Me too.
Wouldn't you want to go to that just to see what?
I'll go. You guys want, I'm 5 minutes from Brooklyn.
Check it out.
But that was literally that was literally like a 5-minute walk from my apartment for many years. I'm very sad that I can't go to that. That's so good. Oh, that's so good.
Everybody in Brooklyn who loves Google Plus should go to this event.
It's a very Brooklyn thing too. It was like you go to this ironically.
What day and time is it?
It's a Tuesday at 11 a.m. at the Pacific Library.
I was gonna say Tuesdays is when we do All About Android. So maybe I'll go at 11.
Before All About Android.
Yeah, there you go.
25 4th Street at Pacific Avenue, Brooklyn. Everybody show up just to show the flag. It's sad to me because it really has great tools. It could have been, I see Mike's still posting. That's where I got that link, by the way. It's from Mike Elgin. Trey Ratcliffe is actually putting together a documentary, kind of a online thing about saying goodbye, where people are going to. He wanted me to record something, and I'll do it. Record their thoughts and memories of Google Plus. It's sad. Although I noticed Karsten will not show my Google Plus. He's not going to show my Google. He saw what happened, right? Poor Mark Million's going, why? I don't want to see that. The spammers just got a hold of it. How do you survive that, Ron? You have to go in every day, don't you?
His name is Jason Howell, and he's amazing.
Let Jason do it.
He's a blessing for all of us. We flag, but also the community does. But we flag and mark things as spam and stuff like that. But stuff gets through. But
if you flag it, you can. That's the thing. It has moderation tools. You can immediately get rid of it.
Yep.
But it's a testament to how few groups are being moderated that these spammers are flourishing, because it works. Yep. The president. Yeah, you just laugh when I say that, don't you? The president, according to the New York Times, has 3 phones, all 3 of them iPhones. 2 of them are carefully modified to be secure by the Secret Service. One, for instance, only has Wi-Fi. The third is a stock iPhone, which, according to the Times, the president keeps because it has his contact list on it, and that's the one he uses to make phone calls. And according to the New York Times, it's the one the Chinese and Russians are hoping he'll use because they can listen in. The president denies it.
All of us have experience doing tech support for older people.
Yeah, that's what it's like. But my contacts are on this one.
And the CIA. The best part of this story to me, there's so much of it that's just horrifying and stupid and wrong, but the best part of it, I think, was was it the Chinese trade minister?
Yes.
Who said, yes, you should use a Huawei phone.
It would be secure.
Dude, that was an amazing troll on that one. I gotta give big props to that one. That was
when Ed said that, I just imagined him putting it on speaker and holding it to his ear the way you see people in coffee shops talk on the phone.
Yeah, really loud.
Like
everybody can hear it. Yeah.
They don't know there's an earpiece. It's like on FaceTime or something, and it's stuck up to their ear.
We do.
Yeah, that's some serious shade. The Huawei thing was some big time shade.
And ZTE is going, what about some love for us? Really? Nothing? Sorry.
Actually, I talked with a PR person from Huawei just this week, because I really like the P20, but I said to her, you know, the first thing it does is say, can we send everything you're doing back to the office? And she said, here's the good news. That's all sent to Germany, not to China.
What?
So there, I feel better.
That actually is good news.
Actually, if you're going to send to one country in the world, send it to Germany. Exactly. They started by talking about Macs, which first was as a Mac fan, was very gratifying. I thought, hallelujah, a little Mac love. They announced a new MacBook Air with, frankly, an anemic processor.
Yeah,
but
very poor spec.
Very poorly spec'd and very inexpensive, $1199. We were hoping it would be sub 1,000. It's not. They do have a sub 1,000 MacBook Air. It's the old one. And then they announced a Mac Mini, which with lots of ports. We bought both. We're gonna use that Mac Mini.
Also more expensive.
Well, $100 more than the base model last time, which was, let's face it, 4 years ago. Last time, I think the dollar was worth less. But but nevertheless. Then they go to the iPads, and suddenly everything's shiny, bright, new, faster.
Yeah.
And I realized if you had started with the iPads and went to the Macs, it would have been like, oh man, how depressing is this?
But also, it's the essential message they're pushing, which for me was, you will buy an iPad whether you like it or not, and we're going to price and spec our systems to do it.
It felt very much to me like the end of the line on the Apple II. Yeah, you remember that probably, Mike, where they had a conference. Apple had a conference in San Francisco. Apple II Forever. They had a song, Apple II Forever, and they killed it like 6 months later. and it was very clear to me that this is basically the end of the line for Mac OS.
They emphasized we're giving them what they want. Some people, for some reason, like our laptops, so we
don't get it. We don't know why.
Yeah, and for some reason they like the Mac Mini, so here's another Mac Mini. But now let's talk about the future of computing, the iPad. And it was really clear.
With the A12X Bionic, which is faster than the MacBook Pro.
I predict that after all the benchmarking is done, the fastest computer that Apple makes is going to be the new iPad.
Yeah, I can quite.
Well, and the graphics too. Like people a guy I know that hasn't had an iPad since like the second iPad. It was the graphics performance that he's like, all right, I'm getting one.
Yeah,
they're doing an 8-core CPU, a 7-core GPU. They even have a machine learning core, dedicated machine learning core. It's so. It seems to me that all of the real innovation that's happening at Apple is happening in those chipsets.
When I saw that the new Apple Pencil magnetically sticks to the iPad, they're copying the Pixelbook, and then they're like, and then it charges through the. I'm like, really?
Yeah, that was
Pixelbook's pencil or pen or whatever you call it has a quadruple A battery. Did you know this existed?
I didn't until I got one of them. Yeah.
What's that? The size of a baby's pinky?
It's tiny. Yes,
baby's something. What?
Pinky.
Yeah, something.
Come on.
It's very small.
Yes. I have standards. Not many, admittedly, but
so wasn't just me, because I love Mac OS and I want to keep using Mac OS. Apple also had AutoCAD on stage, and they said very clearly this has the desktop AutoCAD engine in it. At Adobe's conference a couple of weeks ago, they announced Adobe Photoshop, basically all the features of desktop on the iPad.
But this comes back to what Mike was saying earlier. They want iOS because it's a nice little walled garden that they control absolutely and completely and can monetize that, whereas macOS is messy, other people playing it. And, for all the talk...
Well, furthermore, they're also beholden to Intel, right?
Yeah.
One of the reasons that Apple's Macintosh line has been held back is that Intel is stymied. Can't seem to do a 10-nanometer chip. Apple was very clear. We've got the first 7-nanometer chip in production, the A12X Bionic.
Yeah.
I feel like Apple would love to get out from under Intel.
Yeah.
Even for the Macs.
Well, Intel's got massive problems at the moment. Their work on 10 nanometer is completely stalled. Cobalt, which they were trying out as a method of getting around it, hasn't worked. At the same time, other chip companies are eating their breakfast, and they've got major supply problems on the server side because they've got 99% of the market, and people are still buying those chips, and they can't produce them fast enough. So, plus, they've lost their CEO in rather unusual circumstances. So, yeah, Intel just seems to be flailing at the moment. I don't blame Apple for trying to dump them.
Yeah, the other thing is that they're grappling with a new generation of people who, like you were saying earlier, only want to use their phones. They grew up with touch devices. They only remember touch devices. There are lots of kids these days who never used a mouse before. They think it's kind of a weird contraption from the Victorian era or something like that. And let's face it, this is how change really happens: is old people die and young people are born, and so they basically they're thinking, okay, in 20 years or 10 years, how are we going to get today's iPhone, 20-year-old iPhone users to buy a really expensive second computer for their desk? And it's got to be something that's going to be iPhone-like. Otherwise they're not going to buy it. That's obviously
are people going to do that, or are they just going to have the phone?
I think
more and more we're seeing things like Microsoft's continuity, Intel's I can't remember what they call it, not Samsung's little device where the phone becomes a desktop.
Right. Yeah. Which I think is a wonderful model.
Yeah, which HP tried to do with Windows Mobile, but unfortunately died on its backside because
that was
Windows Mobile was terrible.
Yeah. Augmented reality is going to be a big thing that people use while they're sitting at a desk, I think.
So the screen will be virtual. It'll be imaginary, be projected on your eyeballs instead of sitting in front of it.
That's part of it. I do think there's a future for giant iPad-like devices, and for
the Surface Studio will be an iPad someday.
Exactly. And I think also there'll be things like office windows will be TVs like that one, giant screens that can be, so I think there are going to be screens everywhere, on your face, on the wall, on the desktop surface will be a screen. But this whole touch, it's all going to be iOS-like. It's all going to be touch gestures and that sort of thing.
So, but Apple has a couple of issues. Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, I was going to say that's fine and great, but there could be a fairly long interim here before that reality comes. Yes. So the question is, and this has been debated, I'm not the first one to bring this up, but at what point do they risk? Apple's always been the company of creatives and high-end professionals. It's the thing that kept Apple alive as a company in the late 90s. What's the tipping point where those people have to go away and go to someone else? And also, what is the tipping point where Apple is fine with that?
Well, Brian, wasn't that the point of the event? The point is,
that's what I'm saying.
Let's see what's in the making. It was about creativity. It's a Brooklyn Academy of Music and the Opera House. It was you create with an iPad. Wow. What a year this has been. I am so thrilled that you decided to watch our holiday wrap special. I know many of you have seen all these segments. It was fun to get them all together. Thanks to Carson Bonnie, our producer, and our crack editors who stitched this all together. And I'm really glad they did because it gave them and me a chance to take this week off. I hope you're enjoying your holiday week, celebrating it with family and friends. I also hope you have a wonderful new year, 2019. We will be back for the first TWiT of 2019, which is what, January 6th? Is that right? January 5th? 7th? Yeah, 8th, January 7th, 6th. One of those numbers is right. January 6th we'll be back. As always, Sunday afternoon, 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern, 2300 UTC for This Week in Tech, our Tech News Roundtable. And one of the things we're going to keep doing, I hope you'll like it, all of our shows have a regular cast, but for some reason, I think historic reasons, TWiT is a rotating cast of people that I think we've all come to love. I like that chance to get new voices, a variety of voices on talking about the week's tech news. We're going to keep doing that in 2019. I pray you will keep listening. In fact, do me a favor, subscribe at twit.tv or in your favorite podcast application, and that way you won't miss another episode of TWiT. I've got to raise my glass. Yes, I've been drinking eggnog all show long, and I'm getting a little tipsy. I got to raise my glass to all of you. Thank you so much for making TWiT a part of your lives, for giving all of us a chance to make these shows. We love doing what we do, but it wouldn't make any sense doing it unless you watched, so I really appreciate it. Here's a cheers to you and yours and to a happy and peaceful 2019. And now, without further ado, a word from Santa. Good night, everybody. Another TWiT is literally in the can. Doing the TWiT.